शिरोदिनि वासिनि विष्णुविलासिनि जिष्णुनुते भगवति हेशिति कण्ठकुटुम्बिनि भूरि कुटुम्बिनि भूरि कृते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते सुरवरवर्षिणि दुर्धरदर्शिनि दुर्मुखमर्षिनि हर्षरते त्रिभुवनपोषिनि शङ्करतोषिनि किल्बिषमोषिनि घोषरते धनुजनि रोषिनि दितिसुतरोषिनि दुर्मथतोषिनि सिन्धुसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते.
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. As some of you might know, we just finished a membership live stream roughly about 15-20 minutes back, and we discussed the end of his section, Savarkar section, in this collection called Hindu Rashtradarshan. The first section was just on the Maratha Confederacy history and Hindu Padshahi history. We completed that, and then we checked out we started the section 2 of the book, which is a collection of some of his speeches. Okay, so we discussed 2 speeches by him. One was the 19th session of the Akhil Bharatiya Hindu Mahasabha at Karnavati, Ahmedabad, 1937, and then the 20th session. Avinav and all were there, so they will confirm that the 20th session wala jo speech tha 1938 ka Nagpur mein, that is one of the best speeches I've ever read or heard in my life. I was basically hearing myself speak. So there are no Savarkar speeches in English on live camera recording, unfortunately. So it was absolutely workout motivation material. You won't believe the stuff he says. So I absolutely implore you to go check out at least the last 1 hour of that live stream, because the last 1 hour was about 1 hour, 1.5 hours was that speech, the 20th session in Nagpur, 1938. And now the one we are going to discuss is the 21st session of Hindu Mahasabha at Calcutta in 1939. Okay, so let's see if some equal sparks fly in this speech as well. I am absolutely blown away the stuff we discussed. Dada, did you come to stream for a poor Bangladeshi? Yes, I had decided when I started the book, I had thought that the Calcutta speech I'll do in a public live stream only. I too am holding Savarkar contested legacy to follow along. But is there this speech? Just exploring Vajrayana, not about this. Oh, nice. Dada 4 baje aane wale the na? No, not today. 4 बजे आज तो पिछला वाला लाइव स्ट्रीम हुआ 4 बजे से ही. वो मेंबरशिप तुमने नहीं देखा क्या? अच्छा, इसलिए तुम्हारे फीड में नहीं गया. ओ, अरे यूट्यूब का मेंबरशिप का रूल्स का बहुत कंफ्यूजन है. मैंने कम्युनिटी टैब में वैसे लिंक शेयर किया था, और वैसे जो लोग मेंबर्स हैं उनके लिए सिर्फ डायरेक्ट नोटिफिकेशन जाता है, और इंस्टाग्राम में भी लिंक शेयर किया था कि देखो हो रहा है मेंबरशिप लाइव स्ट्रीम. ओके, सो लेट्स सी द स्टफ, व्हाट स्टफ ही हैज डिस्कस्ड एंड सेड. 21st session of Hindu Mahasabha in Calcutta, 1939. Delegates to and members of the Hindu Mahasabha. The previous speech, you won't believe. I do hope you all at least read it from 1938. Okay. What do you think about Maratha Confederation in Peshwa time? Yeah, amazing description by Savarkar. Some great heroic tales, a lot of backstabbing, some awesome people, some assholes. So people who think that we need a Bengali version of Chhatrapati Shivaji because Marathis are so racially proud that they have made up so many, or at least furthered their interest. But Savarkar was not furthering Marathi interest or Maharashtrian interest. He was saying, he has pointed out how many people betrayed and criticized them harshly. All the people who betrayed the Maratha Confederacy. So I know all that from this book only. Okay, so Savarkar starts. I gratefully acknowledge your appreciation of whatever services I have been able to tender to the Hindu cause during the past 2 years of my tenure of this presidential office, which has persuaded you in calling upon me to preside over this session, also for the third time in an unbroken succession. The keen consciousness of the overwhelming contrast between the stupendous amount of the work which ought to be done if we want to realize our noble aspirations in full and the relatively scanty output of work actually done by us all weighs so heavily on my mind that you all know how I wished and tried to transfer the task of leading the Hindu movement to some mightier Herculean shoulders and re enter the rank of soldiers as a fighting unit. But firstly, because the commander also is a soldier in part and must obey the common will, and secondly, because the very fact that the actual output of work falls short of the enormous requirement makes it incumbent upon us all not to cease from doing even that little which we can do, standing by our posts against all odds under the most adverse circumstances which our generation has to face. And thirdly, on account of the encouraging fact that thousands of eminent, brave, and devoted new workers have entered the field and assure me that they shall see to it, in the spirit of a Pratap, that the Hindu cause triumphs before this generation passes away, and have actually given just a glimpse, in fact, of their grim resolve during the Nizam civil resistance struggle, do I yield to your kind and almost compelling pressure to accept the office of the President of the Hindu Mahasabha for the third time in spite of my failing health. And by the way, 1939, Calcutta, it's a time when the Bengalis are the Hindutwadis and the Marwadis are the commies. And the last speech again, I'm imploring you all to listen to it, check it out, because it covered all aspects: how to go about it, clarity of thought, not turning India into Hindu Pakistan. All of that has been clarified and approached and addressed. Within the limited space of a presidential address like this, it is hardly possible to take even a cursory notice at the 1001 events and problems which Hindudom had to face during the year locally, provincially, and generally from Sindh to Assam. The bloody orgies in which the Muslim mobs indulged only recently in the anti-Hindu riots at Sukur and other places in Sindh, the continuous campaign of raids committed by the Muslim tribes on the northwest frontier province, rendering Hindu life and property in daily danger, the looting of towns and villages by Muslim gangs, proclaiming all along with drum beating, no Muslim need be disturbed, only Hindus will we loot, hundreds of anti-Hindu riots and outrages committed by the Muslim fanatics at various places in UP, Bihar, and Bengal. This Muslim Gundaism on the one hand and the polished and parliamentary Muslim League on the other, which treating Hindu minority with the gentle civilities indicated above in Sindh, Punjab, and Bengal, complains with righteous indignation that the Muslim minority is the only suffering saint throughout the world. Then the Congress League government negotiations, which threaten to prove damaging to Hindu interests in a far more alarming degree than even the notorious communal decision has proved to be, and above all, the war situation, which has given a handle to the government to restore autocracy in all its pristine glory, putting the hands of the clock of constitutional progress in India fully 50 years back. All these and several other events require to be dealt with in detail. But I must leave them to be treated thus by the several resolutions which will have to be proposed in special connection with them, and to the leading speakers who in cases may deal with them more authoritatively, either owing to their local acquaintance with the details, or their expert study of the special questions in hand, so that the little space at my disposal may be better utilized in dealing with those basic principles, policies, and programs which should guide our movements in general, and on which we must now concentrate our attention and efforts for at least a couple of years to come. Nevertheless, while dealing with these, I shall of course have occasion to treat with some of those outstanding current events too, but only by way of illustrating their central message and bearing on the Hindus' movement in general. The Nizam civil resistance movement. Of all these events which took place during the current year, the most outstanding one from the Hindu Sangatanist point of view, and one which has an abiding message for our future policy and program, is of course the campaign of civil resistance which we had to carry on against the anti-Hindu policy of the Nizam government for full 6 months during this year. It was a veritable crusade, as righteous as heroic. Our Arya Samaji brethren had to bear the brunt of the fight. Not less than 10,000 Arya joined the fight and fought so bravely as to demonstrate that the sacrificial fire lighted up by Maharshi Dayanand Swamiji, the first and foremost Hindu Sangatanist of our age, burns brighter and brighter as days pass by, and his mission has not fallen into undeserving hands. Not less than 5,000 civil resistors defied the anti-Hindu bans of the Nizam government and kept up the fight with unflinching courage and admirable tact on the Hindu Mahasabha flank. But what is more encouraging to note from the pan-Hindu point of view is the fact that it was not only the Arya Samaj and the Hindu Mahasabha, though these two in the main led the struggle, but it was the whole Hindu brotherhood in general which joined hands and participated in the movement so wholeheartedly and with such fervor under the Hindu flag that without this pan-Hindu cooperation, sympathy and sacrifice throughout India, we could not have carried on the struggle to such a successful termination. This fact, to my mind, constitutes the really abiding achievement we could record, apart from the detailed demands which the Hindu Sangatanists had compelled the Nizam government to grant. For this Dharma Yuddha, this fight for the righteous Hindu cause proved to demonstrate that in spite of caste and creed, sect and section, Hindudom as a whole does still pulsate with a common national being. Behold the thousands and thousands of Hindus leaving their hearths and homes, their nearest and dearest marching on even at the risk of their lives to the rescue of their co-religionists and compatriots in the Nizam state, whom they had perchance never seen or known personally, the Punjabis and Sindhis, Bengalis and Biharis, Marathas and Madrasis, Brahmins and Bhangis, Sanatanists, Arya Samajists, Sikhs, Jains, Lingayats, the rich and poor. Everyone who was proud of being a Hindu marched on under a common Hindu banner for the vindication of Hindu honor and faced untold miseries. Outrageous riots, bayonets and lathi charges, hunger and thirst, and even death, but kept asserting to his last breath, Hindu Dharma ki jai, Hindustan Hinduo ka. Take for example the case of Sergeant SJT Reddy बोला है, ठीक है. SJT का full form क्या होता है? I don't know. Srijukt Reddy, I guess. Srijukt Reddy or some of those Hindu Sangatanists who were ordered to be flogged or lathied for raising shouts of Vande Mataram and Hindustan Hinduo ka. For each stripe and lathi stroke, they went on repeating Vande Mataram and Hindustan Hinduo ka. Many a brave son died under torture. Amongst them was Master Sadashiv Pathak, a Maratha boy under 16 years of age who had to carry daily heavy stones on his head in spite of his bitter complaints that he suffered keen pangs in his chest. But he would not apologize and to lay down his life in consequence. You will read such numerous examples of heroic devotion to the Hindu cause and in the Hindu cause in the authenticated histories of this movement, which are going to be published shortly, both by the Arya Samaj and the Hindu Mahasabha. Why, there are present in this very pandal here leaders and gentlemen of unimpeachable integrity who had themselves passed through such ordeals while they were under imprisonment in the Nizam jails as leaders of or soldiers fighting out this Dharma Yuddha, this crusade in vindication of Hindu faith, Hindu freedom, and Hindu honor. These crusaders received no pay nor were their families promised pension. Many of them had resigned their services and professions, earning in cases thousands a month. All of them knew they were unarmed, marching against an armed force and from the fate which those who preceded. Them they knew they will be tortured, starved, lathied, and bayoneted too, and yet they marched forth voluntarily, for there was no conscription but moral. You will be surprised to know that after the news of the outrageous lathi charge at Aurangabad on the Hindu Sangatanist prisoners, volunteers came in large numbers to our shibirs to register their names, and some who had then only recently returned after serving their first term in the Nizam jails as civil resistors insisted on being sent again to defy the anti-Hindu bans in the Nizam state. The fact that such a Hindu force consisting of 14 to 15,000 civil resistors could be raised at the very first blare of the trumpet call by the Hindu Sangatanist party today is a lesson for us and for all those who dare to treat our demands lightly. These 15,000 Hindu Sangatanists continued a force superior to those English or German forces who are now fighting in Europe for their respective nations in moral courage. And had it not been only a civil resistance movement, and had we been in a position to face our opponents bayonet for bayonet and rifle for rifle, chances are they would have proved superior to them in an armed resistance too. But even if we let chances alone, what is also enough is to encourage our Hindu Sangatanist party in India with a self-confidence with the bracing up consciousness of having won a moral victory, and on the other hand, to warn all anti Hindu forces that they should henceforth think twice before they treat the resolutions of the Hindu Mahasabha as lightly as they were wont to do. What we resolved in heroic words at Nagpur or Sholapur last year had been translated into heroic deeds before we reassembled at Calcutta on the eve of this ensuing year. One more aspect of this struggle deserves a special emphasis inasmuch as it is sure to exercise a liberating influence on the future of the Hindu movement in general. The Nizam civil resistance campaign has broken the demoralizing spell which weighed like an incubus on the Hindu mind for some 20 years in the past, that no cause, howsoever righteous it may be in itself from the Hindu point of view, should be deemed righteous unless the Congress was pleased to certify it as national, which word in 99 cases out of 100 proved to be tantamount with the word anti-Hindu, and that no movement on an all-India scale should be or could be carried out successfully unless it was sponsored and led on by the Congress flag. Even in the case of the murderous Muslim riots at Kohat or the general massacre of Hindus perpetrated by the Moplas from village to village in Malabar, the Hindus did not even dare to condemn the Muslim fanaticism or a pan-Hindu scale or on a pan-Hindu scale all over India, because the step was not certified by the Congress as national. The Congress wanted to play the same game even in this case and dictatorially anathematized the Nizam civil resistance movement as communal, as anti-national. The days when Congress was declaring anything and everything anti-national. But this time the Hindu Sangatanist Party had an ideology of its own conception of what is really national or otherwise interpreted in the light of reason that had freed itself from the blind and unquestioning subservience to any inner voices which, on their own admission, were sure passports to Himalayan errors or new lights which scarcely made darkness visible, and subservience to any papal bulls issued by the Congress Church, and marched on to the rescue of their Hindu co-religionists and compatriots in the Nizam state, led on by the Hindu flag. The movement rapidly spread throughout the length and breadth of the country, from Peshawar to Madras. On that one single evening, for example, of the Nizam Nisheda Day, as well as Hindu Nation Day, not less than 1 crore of Hindus were found gathered under the Hindu flag in capital cities and towns throughout India, in pursuance of the mandate to the Hindu Sangatanist Party to back up the Hindu movement, which seemed only to flourish all the more the Congress anathematized and opposed it as communal and anti-national. Why did Congress oppose it? The Congress wanted to reform the states. Well, was not Hyderabad the biggest and yet the worst ruled autocratic state in India? It was at least as worthwhile to introduce constitutional reforms and restore civil liberties in the Nizam state as in the tiny taluka-like state of Rajkot. Did not Gandhiji want us to believe that the reform movement of that petty Rajkot had assumed the magnitude of an all-India question, that the whole Indian Ocean was set on fire in the tiny teacup of Mr. Veerawala? And yet, the question of demanding constitutional reforms for nearly 1 crore of subjects in the Nizam state, which the Hindu Mahasabha had undertaken and was fighting for, seemed to him so remote and unconnected with the Indian question that he could not spare even as much sympathy or interest as he would for the Abyssinians in Africa, for the Spanish or the Czechs in Europe. Not only Gandhiji, but no Congressite, neither the backward, nor the forward, nor the inward bloc or their heads stepped out to condemn the Nizam government, even after the inhuman lathi charges on the Hindu civil resistors at Aurangabad jail or the bloody riots at Hyderabad. Then again, did not Congress patronize civil liberties? Was it not a fact that under the Nizam government, even the life and property of millions of Hindus was held in daily danger? No freedom either of speech or worship or association worth the name existed. Then why did not the Congress join hands with Hindu Sangatanists who were engaged in a life and death struggle to secure these civil liberties in the state, or at least pass a resolution to support the justice of their demands? Was it because the Hindu Sangatanists went to the field as Hindus instead of as Indians? Well, it may be a sin for a Hindu to do even a good thing as a Hindu, except on the election day when he has to vote for a Congressite who has to state himself as a Hindu, as a unit in the Hindu electorate. This is why I'm saying do check out the previous speech as well, because he approaches it in a much more academic way, discusses all the concepts of Hindu, Indian nationality, Hindu nation, etc. Brilliant speech. But when the Muslims in Kashmir rose with the help of outside Muslims in an armed revolt against the Hindu king, demanding representation for the Muslims as Muslims, did not Gandhiji write as a born democrat that if the Hindu king of Kashmir could not satisfy and allay the discontent of the Muslims who formed 85% of his subjects, he had no moral right to rule but should forthwith abdicate and retire to Kashi. Well, more than 85% of the subjects of the Nizam are Hindus. They had only resorted to unarmed civil resistance to the intolerable religious, cultural, and political persecutions with the help of their co-religionists outside the state. But did Gandhiji, the born democrat, advise the Nizam too to abdicate and retire to Makkah? No, on the contrary, he wrote in so many words that he was overwhelmingly concerned throughout the civil resistance movement as not to, quote unquote, embarrass His Exalted Highness the Nizam. I can recount 101 petty mischiefs. Petty mischiefs also, which Congressites of the national brand were busy playing to defeat this Hindu Sangatanist movement against the anti-Hindu policy of the Nizam government. But that is not what I intend to deal with here. Suffice it to say that the Hindu Mahasabha could secure the sympathy even of some English MPs in England and persuade them to protest against the horrible oppression at the Aurangabad jail and during the Hyderabad riots the Hindus had to undergo. But no Congress ministers in all the 7 provinces touched the subject even with a pair of tongs, initiated not even a discussion in the Congress or Indian legislatures, nor uttered a word in defense of the Hindus against the Nizam government. Although these very Congress ministers could threaten to resign altogether in the case of the pettiest Rajkot affair. The moral is plain and must be plainly told. So long as the Congress continues to hug the pseudo-national ideology as it does today, its policy is bound to be anti-Hindu, is bound to betray Hindu interests, howsoever just and legitimate they may be. Just think, if the Hindu electorate had voted for the Hindu Sangatanist representative and thus had Hindu Mahasabha ministers in Bombay, Madras and other parts, could they have remained so callously indifferent to the oppression the Hindus had to undergo in Hyderabad? What tremendous pressure they could have brought to bear on the Nizam government in staying its hand from out-Heroding Herod. It was essentially to emphasize this point that whenever the Hindus are oppressed as Hindus and especially at the hands of the Muslims, the Congress simply will not raise a finger in their defense, that the Hindu Sangatanists must take up the task of defending themselves on their own shoulders, and if they mean to do so, they can do it in spite of the Congress indifference or even opposition, that the Nizam civil resistance movement was launched by the Hindu Sangatanist leaders independently of the Congress under a Hindu flag. The struggle was a test to begin with the retrospective pan-Hindu movement, and we Hindu Sangatanists were not only not Rajkoted at Hyderabad, but on the contrary, came out with flying colors out of this testing ordeal, inasmuch as we have recovered and actualized through this struggle our racial and cultural homogeneity, our real national self, which under a swoon of self-forgetfulness during the last 100 years or so was all but obliterated. One word about the political reforms announced by the Nizam government and the undertaking it has given to grant Hindu civil, cultural and religious liberties, in consideration of which the civil resistance movement was suspended by the Hindu Mahasabha in the spirit of responsive cooperation and accommodation, for which His Exalted Highness the Nizam had graciously pleaded in his announcement. The Hindu Mahasabha thanks the Nizam government for the general amnesty of all Hindu civil resistors. It was a step in the right direction, but since then, the Nizam government has not moved as quickly as it ought to have done in introducing the reforms, in themselves inadequate and halting in practical operation. The Mahasabha is extremely anxious to open out some way to peaceful constitutional progress and restore lasting amity between the Hindus and Muslims in that state, and therefore it begs to draw the pointed attention of the Nizam to the fact that any unreasonable delay in putting the reforms in actual operation cannot but prove dangerous and give rise to discontent, which is perfectly avoidable if but the Nizam government takes time by his forelock before it is too late. And the second thing that is most urgent is the fact that the Nizam government should hold some of the fanatical local Muslim officials in leash who, counting on an ultimate support from the central government, are still harassing the Hindus every now and then. If the local fanatical Muslim rabble and such officials are strictly dealt with by the government in some cases, the Muslim zealots will soon come to their senses all over the state. I hope these warnings will be taken by the Nizam government in the amicable spirit which prompts me in sounding them. The Shiva Mandir Satyagraha at Delhi. The splendid and sustained struggle the Hindus have carried on at Delhi in connection with the Shiv Mandir affair deserves also an all-India homage. It too sounds the same warning that the Congress does not and will not and cannot defend a Hindu cause against any anti-Hindu aggression. But in spite of it all, the overwhelming suffering and sacrifice in men and money in connection with the Shiv Mandir at Delhi shall not go in vain, if but only those Hindus who pledge to safeguard Hindu interests and are not enslaved to the Congress ticket are sent by the Hindus on a Hindu Sangatanist ticket to represent them to the corporation. The pan-Hindu spirit which this struggle has lit up will prove the real Shiva. On the site where stood the tiny mud hut which has been so high-handedly destroyed, I already see rising before my mind's eye a magnificent temple of Shiva and thousands of pilgrims crowding to worship at it before a decade passes away. The successful resistance the Hindus offered in defense of their legitimate rights at Khamgaon, Mahad, Bhagalpur, and several other places during this year are also full of significance and testify to the fact that the spirit of self-assertion is consolidating the Hindus under the Hindu Mahasabha's lead. But I must not lose myself in the labyrinths of detailed events any longer and address myself to the chief task I have set before me in this address of outlining the fundamental basis and general policy and program on which I wish we all concentrate our attention for at least a couple of years to come. Some of the basic principles and tenets of the Hindu movement. It is encouraging to note that thousands of those who were brought up by their early days under the influence of the pseudo-nationalistic ideology current in the Congress camp and were consequently so thoroughly prejudiced against anything that was connected with Hindutva that they mutilated against the very word Hindu as something superstitious, out of date, unworthy of a progressive patriot to own, should now be evincing a genuine desire to know all about the Hindu Mahasabha, its policy and immediate program. The case of no less a personality than Mr. Tairsi, whose sad demise all Bombay lamented only a couple of months ago, can serve as a case in point. He was reputed to be one amongst the first 10 citizens of Bombay, a rationalist of rationalists, one of the foremost Congressites. Yet, after I had casually explained to him the Hindu Sangatanist ideology as expounded in my Nagpur speech, he publicly confessed that the rationalism which made him shun the word Hindu or Hindu Sangatan as a crass superstition was itself the crassest of superstitions. He approaches, in that previous speech, what should be the Hindu view towards Christians, Jains, Jews, Muslims, Parsis, all specifically, and in different ways, and why having talking about Hindu ideas or Hindu politics, if that's communal, why then being a patriot and being an Indian nationalist is also communal? And he also approaches the question of why it can't be called a backdated idea, because countries which are evidently more advanced than us, at least during the times he was writing, they are still advanced more than us even today. But in the 30s, countries in the Europe, they were almost every day doing some war and making up a new country based on identity, cultural identity, and distancing themselves from people who were in the so-called territorial unity, but not contributing to the cultural unity of the place. So then, if those so-called advanced countries are creating countries of their own, then why can't be an evidently backward country as well also talk about a Hindu nation, etc. He not only joined our party but proudly accepted the presidentship of the Bombay Provincial Hindu Sabha. Throughout my extensive tours, I have come across thousands of the intellectual class who simply mutilated against the Hindu idea at its first mention, who cogently explained, rubbed their eyes in a doubting mood at its second mention, and half of them passed for a closer acquaintance with it, while the other half simply capitulated at its third mention. There has grown of late enormous curiosity throughout India to know something of the Hindu Mahasabha, its aims, and as to what is its program, and this demand at times comes from foreign countries as well. That is the reason why I wish to devote this address mainly to enumerate categorically the leading principles and tenets on which the Hindu movement is based, and to outline its general policy and some outstanding details of its immediate program. It will serve as a cogent statement of our case and may be utilized as a basis for a manifesto in future to an organized Hindu party in the legislatures, as well as a handy guide to our workers and propagandists in the press and platform. It may involve some repetition, but endless repetition of truth, as also a falsehood, is about the only means to cast the mentality of a whole people into a required mold. As long as falsehood holds, the propagandistic field truth must speak out to silence it as many times as the former repeats a lie. The following are some of the basic tenets and aspects of the Hindu movement. Every person is a Hindu who regards and owns this Bharat Bhumi, this land from the Indus to the sea, as his fatherland as well as his holy land, that is, the land of the origin of the region, of his religion, the cradle of his faith. The followers, therefore, of Vedicism, Sanatanism, Jainism, Buddhism, Lingayatism, Sikhism, the Arya Samaji, the Brahma Samaji, the Dev Samaji, the Prarthana Samaji, and such other religions of Indian origin are Hindus and constitute Hindudom, that is, the Hindu people as a whole. Consequently, the so-called aboriginal or hill tribes also are Hindus because India is their fatherland as well as their holy land of whatever form of religion or worship they follow. This definition, therefore, should be recognized by the government and made the test of Hindutva in enumerating the population of Hindus in the government census to come. The definition rendered in Sanskrit stands thus. Sindhu wo jo quote tha. I am not going to read the Sanskrit pronunciation because I can't read it and I'm going to do a horrible pronunciation of it. I'll read the translation. The word Hindu is not of a foreign origin, nor it is connected with the advent of the Muslims in India. No, I don't think this is a translation. Yeah, this is an explanation. With the advent of the Muslims in India, as was erroneously suspected for a time under the mischievous influence of some alien scribes. Our land and our people were at times called Saptasindhus or Sindhus even by our Vedic rishis. The following verse, for example, from the Rig Veda itself will conclusively testify to this fact. I can't read this. Translation nahi diya gaya hai. Thousands of years before Muhammad, the Muslim prophet, was born, the ancient Babylonians knew us as Sindhus, and the ancient Zend-Avesta refers to us as Hindus. One of our provinces on this side of the Indus has retained this ancient appellation of our land and people down to this day, refer to it as Sindhu Desh and its people as Sindhis in Sindh. In our modern Prakrit, the Sanskrit I is often transformed into a G, just as the word Kesari in Sanskrit or Krishan has been transformed into Hindu Prakrit as Kehari and Kahana. Even so, the word Sindhu has been transformed into modern Prakrits as Hindu. Those who want to have this point exhaustively and conclusively treated may read my book Hindutva. Hinduism, Hindutva and Hindudom. In expounding the ideology of the Hindu movement, it is absolutely necessary to have a correct grasp of the meaning attached to these three terms. From the word Hindu has been coined the word Hinduism in English. It means the school or system of religions the Hindus follow. The second word Hindutva is far more comprehensive and refers not only to the religious aspect of the Hindu people as the word Hinduism does, but comprehends even their cultural, linguistic, social and political aspects as well. It is more or less akin to Hindu polity, and its nearly exact translation would be Hinduness. The third word Hindudom means the Hindu people spoken of collectively. It is a collective name for the Hindu world, just as Islam denotes the Muslim world or Christendom denotes the Christian world. We Hindus are a nation by itself. In my presidential speech at Nagpur, I had, for the first time in the history of our recent politics, pointed out in bold relief that the whole Congress ideology was vitiated ab initio by its unwitted assumption that the territorial unity, a common habitat, was the only factor that constituted and ought to and must constitute a nation. Even Ambedkar opposed this idea of just territorial unity in his book Pakistan or Partition of India. This conception of a territorial nationality has since then received a rude shock in Europe itself, from which it was imported wholesale to India, and the present war has justified my assertion by exploding the myth altogether. All nations carved out to order on the territorial design without any other common bond to mold each of them into a national being have gone rack and ruin, tumbled down like a house of cards. Poland and Czechoslovakia will ever serve as a stern warning against any such efforts to frame heterogeneous peoples into such hodgepodge nations based only on the shifting sands of the conception of territorial nationality, not cemented by any cultural, tactical, or historical affinities, and consequently having no common will to incorporate themselves into a nation. These treaty nations broke up at the first opportunity they got. The German part of them went over to Germany, the Russian to Russia, Czechs to Czechoslovakia, and Poles to Poland. The cultural, linguistic, historical, and such other organic affinities proved stronger than the territorial one. Only those nations have persisted in maintaining their national unity and identity during the last 3 to 4 centuries in Europe, which had developed racial, linguistic, cultural, and such other organic affinities in addition to their territorial unity, or even at times in spite of the territorial unity, and consequently willed to be homogeneous national units such as England, France, Germany, Italy, Portugal, etc. Judged by any and all of these tests, which go severally and collectively to form such a homogeneous and organic nation, in India, we Hindus are marked out as an abiding nation by ourselves. Not only we own a common fatherland, a territorial unit, but what is scarcely found anywhere else in the world, we have a common holy land which is identified with our common fatherland. This Bharat Bhumi, this Hindustan, India, is both our Pitrabhu and Punyabhu. Our patriotism, therefore, is doubly sure. Then we have common affinities, cultural, religious, historical, linguistic, and racial, which through the process of countless centuries of association and assimilation molded us into a homogeneous and organic nation, and above all, induced a will to lead a corporate and common national life. The Hindus are no treaty nation, but an organic national being. One more pertinent point must be met, as it often misleads our Congressite Hindu brethren in particular. The homogeneity that wheels a people into a national being does not only imply the total absence of all internal differences, religious, racial, or linguistic, of sects and sections amongst themselves. Very, very important point, for which I keep bringing up the Federalist Papers, where they are also addressing John Adams, John Jay, Alexander Hamilton. They are also addressing this problem that people think that just because there are some differences among a people, therefore it means a completely different nation altogether. He says, no, bhai, most of our ways of life are common, therefore let's live together as a nation. Savarkar is saying that, exactly that the homogeneity that wheels the people into a national being does not only imply the total absence of all internal differences, religious, racial, or linguistic, of sects and sections amongst themselves. It only means that they differ more from other people as a national unit than they differ amongst themselves. Even the most Unitarians nation of today, say the British or the French, cannot be free from any religious, linguistic, cultural, racial, or other different sections, sects, or even some antipathies existing among themselves. National homogeneity connotes oneness of a people in relation to the contrast they present to any other people as a whole. We Hindus, in spite of 1001 differences within our fold, are bound by such religious, cultural, historical, racial, linguistic, and other affinities in common as to stand out as a definitely homogeneous people as soon as we are placed in contrast with any other non-Hindu people, say the English or Japanese or even the Indian Muslims. That is the reason why today we, the Hindus from Kashmir to Madras and Sindh to Assam, will be a nation by ourselves, while the Indian Muslims are on the whole more inclined to identify themselves and their interests with Muslims outside India than Hindus who live next door, like the Jews in Germany. Some well-meaning but simple-minded Hindus amuse themselves with the thought and hope against hope that inasmuch as the majority of Indian Muslims also are in fact allied to us by race and language, and in cases had gone over to the Muslim fold in living memory of this very generation, they could easily be persuaded to acknowledge this homogeneity and even blood relation with the Hindus and merge themselves into a common national being if but we only remind them of these affinities and appeal to them in their name. These innocent souls are really to be pitied, as if the Muslims do not know of it all. The fact is that the Muslims know of these affinities all but too well. The only difference to be taken into account being that while the Hindus love these affinities which bind the Hindu to a Hindu and to dwell on them with pride, the Muslims hate the very mention of them and are trying to eradicate the very memory of it all. Some of them fabricate histories and genealogies to connect their origin with Arabs or Turks. They are trying to carve out a separate language for themselves and graft it as best as they can on the Arab stock. They are carrying on a campaign against the Hindu family names such as Tambe and Modak, which in parts like Konkan convert Muslims still bear and replace them by Arab ones, and are bent on widening the cleavage deeper and broader by removing every trace which may remind them of having once something in common with the Hindu stock. The religious and theocratic traditions join hands in impressing upon their mind that Hindustan is not and cannot be a Dar al Islam, their country, which they may love until and unless the Hindus, the Kafirs, and either converted to man and either converted to a man to Islam or are reduced to helotage, paying the jizya to some would be Muslim sovereignty over this land. The very word Hindustan stinks in their nostrils. I am not referring to these items here in any spirit of either condemnation or justification. I am telling the simple fact, which no Muslim can honestly contest, that Islam as a whole wants a deliberate design to assert itself in India as a nation altogether heterogeneous with the Hindus and having nothing in common with them. Consequently, it ought to be clear even to these well-meaning Hindu simpletons that this refusal of the Indian Muslims to merge in a common national unit leaves the Hindus negatively too as a nation by themselves, because we then become the outgroup. Swarajya to the Hindus must mean only that Rajya in which their swatva, their ownness, their individualness, their Hindutva can assert itself without being overloaded by any non-Hindu people, whether they be Indian territorial or extraterritorials. Some Englishmen are and may continue to be territorially born Indians. Can therefore the overlordship of these Anglo-Indians be a Swarajya to the Hindus? Aurangzeb or Tipu were hereditary Indians, nay, were the sons of converted Hindu mothers. Did that mean that the rule of Aurangzeb or Tipu was a Swarajya to the Hindus? No. Although they were territorially Indians, they proved to be the worst enemies of Hindudom, and therefore a Shivaji, a Gobind Singh, Pratap, or the Peshwa had to fight against the Muslim domination and establish a real Hindu Swarajya. Consequently, under the present circumstances too, all that an Indian national state can mean is that the Muslim minority in India will have the right to be treated as equal citizens, enjoying equal protection and civic rights in proportion to their population. The Hindu majority will not encroach on the legitimate rights of any non-Hindu minority, but in no case can the Hindu majority resign its right, which as a majority it is entitled to exercise under any democratic and legitimate constitution. The Muslim minority in particular has not obliged the Hindus by remaining in minority, and therefore they must remain satisfied with the status they occupy and with the legitimate share of civic and political rights that is their proportionate due. It would be simply preposterous to endow the Muslim minority with the right of exercising a practical veto on the legitimate rights and privileges of the majority and call it a Swarajya. The Hindus do not want a change of masters and are not going to struggle and fight and die only to replace an Edward by an Aurangzeb simply because the latter happens to be born within Indian borders. But they want henceforth to be masters themselves in their own house, in their own land. Consequently, the name Hindustan must continue to be the appellation of our country. Such other names as India, Hind, etc. being derived from the same original word Sindhu may be used but only to signify the same sense, the land of the Hindus, a country which is the abode of the Hindu nation, Aryavarta, Bharat Bhumi, and such other names are of course the ancient and the most cherished epithets of our motherland and will continue to appeal to the cultured elite. In this insistence that the motherland of the Hindus must be called but Hindustan, no encroachment or humiliation is implied in connection with any of our non-Hindu countrymen. Our Parsi and Christian countrymen are already too akin to us culturally and are too patriotic, and Anglo-Indians too sensible to refuse to fall in line with us in Hindus on so legitimate a ground. So far as our Muslim and sorry, I'm getting too excited with these speeches. So far as our Muslim countrymen are concerned, it is useless to conceal the fact that some of them are already inclined to look upon this molehill also as an insuperable mountain in their way to Hindu-Muslim unity, the name Hindustan. कि नहीं अब वो नाम हिंदुस्तान हो गया, आप क्या करें? But they should remember that the Muslims do not dwell only in India, nor are the Indian Muslims the only heroic remnants of the faithful in Islam. China has crores of Muslims. Greece and Palestine and even Hungary and Poland have thousands of Muslims amongst their nationals, but being there a minority, only a community. Their existence in these countries has never been advanced as a ground to change the ancient names of these countries, which indicate the abodes of those races whose overwhelming majority own the land. The country of the Poles continues to be Poland, and of the Greeks as Greece. The Muslims there did not or dared not distort them, but are quite content to distinguish themselves as Polish Muslims or Grecian Muslims or Chinese Muslims when the occasion arises. So also our Muslim countrymen may distinguish themselves nationally or territorially whenever they want as Hindustani Muslims, without compromising in the least their separateness as a religious or cultural entity. Nay, the Muslims have been calling themselves as Hindustanis ever since their advent of India of their own accord. But in spite of it all, some irrational Muslim sections amongst our countrymen object even to this name of our country, and that is no reason why they should play cowards, and that is no reason why we should play cowards to our own conscience. We Hindus must not betray or break the continuity of our nation from the Sindhus in Rigvedic days to the Hindus of our own generation, which is implied in Hindustan, the accepted appellation of our motherland. Just as the land of the Germans is Germany, of the English England, of the Turks Turkestan, of the Afghans Afghanistan, even so we must have it indelibly impressed on the map of the earth for all times to come, a Hindustan, the land of Hindus. The pan-Hindu flag, the Kundalini Kripanankiti Gerua flag, shall be the flag of the Hindu nation, with its Om, the swastik, and the sword. It appeals to sentiments cherished by our race ever since the Vedic days. Those who like to realize the inner spirit and know the raison d'etre of its design and the symbols would do well to read the special tract I have written styled the Pan-Hindu Dhwaj. It must be emphasized in this connection that all those Hindu flags other than this, which are current amongst the Hindus as the colors of the different constituents which go to form our Pan-Hindu brotherhood, such as the Sanatanists, the Sikhs, the Jains, the Aryas, etc., will be respected by every Hindu as his own, inasmuch as they are but different manifestations of the common Pan-Hindu spirit. Nor should it be supposed that the Hindu flag implies any inherent antagonism to the several colors of our non-Hindu countrymen. The Muslims are welcome to have their own religious colors to represent their own community. In short, we shall respect any flag which any section of our countrymen adopts, whether religious or political, whether it is the Muslim League flag or the Congress tricolor or the red one, so long as it continues to respect in return the Pan-Hindu flag and does not antagonize it, but continues as allied colors. But Hindudom as a whole will be represented by the Pan-Hindu flag alone. The Sanskrit shall be our Dev Bhasha, our sacred language, and the Sanskrit Nishtha Hindu. The Hindi, which is derived from Sanskrit and draws its nourishment from the latter, is our Rashtra Bhasha, our current national language. Besides being the richest and the most cultured of the ancient languages of the world, to us Hindus, the Sanskrit is the holiest tongue of tongues. Our scriptures, history, philosophy, and culture have their roots so deeply embedded in Sanskrit literature that it forms veritably the brain of our race. Mother of the majority of our mother tongues, she has suckled the rest of them at her breast. All Hindu languages currently today, whether derived from Sanskrit or grafted onto it, can only grow and flourish on the sap of life they imbibe from Sanskrit. The Sanskrit language, therefore, must ever be an indispensable constituent of the classical course for Hindu youth. In adopting Hindi as the national tongue of Hindudom, no humiliation or any invidious distinction is implied as regards other provincial tongues. We are all as attached to our provincial tongues as to Hindi, and they will all grow and flourish in their respective spheres. In fact, some of them are today more progressive and richer in literature. But nevertheless, taken all in all, Hindi can serve the purpose of a national pan-Hindu language best. It must also be remembered that Hindi is not made a national language to order. The fact is that long before either English or even the Muslims stepped into India, Hindi in its general form had already come to occupy the position of a national tongue throughout Hindustan. The Hindu pilgrim, the tradesman, the tourist, the soldier, the pandit travelled up and down from Bengal to Sindh and the Kashmir to Rameshwar by making himself understood from locality to locality through Hindi. Just as Sanskrit was the national language of the Hindu intellectual world, even so Hindi has been for at least 1,000 years in the past the national Indian tongue of the Hindu people. Added to that, and as a consequence of that, we find even today that it is understood and even spoken as a mother tongue by a far larger number of people than is the case with any other Hindu language. Consequently, it must be made compulsory for every Hindu student through secondary schools at any rate to learn Hindi as his pan-Hindu national language without neglecting in the least his training in his provincial mother tongue. By Hindi, we of course mean the pure Sanskrit Nishtha Hindi, as we find it, for example, in the Satyarth Prakash written by Maharshi Dayanand Saraswati. How simple and untainted with a single unnecessary foreign word is that Hindi, and how expressive withal. It may be mentioned in passing that Swami Dayanand Ji was about the first Hindu leader who gave conscious and definite expression to the view that Hindi should be the pan-Hindu national language of India. This Sanskrit Nishtha Hindi has nothing to do with that hybrid, the so-called Hindustani, which is being hatched up by the Wardha scheme. It is nothing short of a linguistic monstrosity and must be ruthlessly suppressed, the Bollywood Hindi. The Hindi that is actually opposed by our Protapaditya fanboys, our Rantak Pakkos. So there's an agreement between Rantak Pakko and Savarkar. Not only that, but it is our bounden duty to oust out ruthlessly all unnecessary alien words, whether Arabic or English, from every Hindu tongue, whether provincial or dialectical. We are not against English or any other language. Nay, we insist on the study of literature. We insist on the study of English as an indispensable necessity and a profitable passport to world literature. I have marked such fascinating things even in the previous speeches. Do check out the live stream, the membership live stream of today. But we must not allow the influx of alien words into our language without checking their past and testing their necessity. Our Hindu brethren in Bengal are especially to be congratulated upon in this connection, because the Bengali literature is admirably free from any such unclean admixture of unnecessary alien words, which cannot be said regarding our other provincial tongues and literature. And guys, this is what people who have been following my channel for more than 2 years know, that every time I've read a Sanskrit text translated in English, where I read 2 lines of Sanskrit and then read the translation, I have only expressed shock and awe that, oh my God, every Sanskrit word after Sanskrit word after Sanskrit word are today used in colloquial day-to-day Bengali. Bengali is the purest, closest to Sanskrit today among all Indian languages. The Nagari shall be the national script of Hindudom. Our Sanskrit alphabetical order is phonetically about the most perfect which the world has yet devised, and almost all our current Indian scripts already follow it. The Nagari script too follows this order. Wait, मेरा ना बैक पेन हो रहा है, मुझे थोड़ा गलत जगह पे मैंने चेयर डाल लिया है. Let's keep it here. The size of this book is different, so I'm having to bend too much. The Nagari script too follows this order. Like the Hindi language, the Nagari script too has already been current for centuries all over India amongst the Hindu literary circles for some 2000 years at any rate in the past, and was even popularly nicknamed as the Shastri Lipi, the script of our Hindu scriptures. With a little touch here and there, it could be reformed so as to render it as suitable to modern mechanical printing as the Roman script. Such a reform movement was set on foot in Maharashtra about some 40 years ago by Mr. Vaidya and others. An organized movement later on under my lead met with an amount of practical success and has already popularized it. I strongly recommend that as an immediate step to popularize Nagari as our national script, all our Hindu papers in different provinces should begin to publish at least a couple of columns of their provincial languages in Nagari script. It is a matter of common knowledge that if Bengali or Gujarati is printed in Nagari, it is more or less understood by readers in several other provinces. Yes. To have only one common language throughout Hindustan at a stroke is impracticable and unwise. But to have the Nagari script as the only common script throughout Hindudom is much more feasible. Nevertheless, it should be borne in mind that the different Hindu scripts current in our different provinces have a future of their own and may flourish side by side with the Nagari. All that needs to be immediately done as indispensable in the common interest of Hindudom as a whole is that the Nagari script must be made a compulsory subject along with the Hindi language in every school in the case of Hindu students. It is interesting to remind you here how two prominent Congress presidents proposed to solve this problem of a national tongue and a national script. Pandit Nehru thinks leaving even Maulana Abul Kalam Azad far behind, who only proposes Hindustani, which he assures us is tantamount to Urdu, that the highly Arabic Urdu of the Aligarh School or the Osmania University School is best fitted to be the national language of India, including, of course, some 28 crores of Hindus, while Desh Gaurav Subhash Babu, improving upon the situation, beat even Panditji's ingenuity hollow by proposing from the presidential chair of the Indian National Congress that Roman script would suit India as the best national script. That is how the Congress ideology approaches things national. Roman script to be the national script of India. How eminently practicable, to say the least. Your Basumati, Ananda Bazar Patrika and all Bengali papers to appear every day in Roman script. The Bande Mataram song to be printed in this new national style as Tomari Pratima Ghadibe Mondire Mondire, and the Gita to begin within this following attractive setting as Dharma Kshetre, Kurukshetra, Samaveta, Yuyutsava, and so on and so on. It is true, as Subhash Babu says, that Kamal Pasha abolished the Arabic script as unsuited to print and took to Roman script. But this fact has a lesson for our Mohammedan zealots who want the Urdu script, that is this very Arabic style, to thrust even on the Hindus as an up-to-date national script, and it has no connection with the Hindus. Kamal Pasha took to the Roman script because the Turks had nothing better of their own to fall back upon. The Andamanis pick up cowries and make a necklace of them. But is that the reason why Kuber also should do the same? We Hindus should rather call upon Arabia and Europe to adopt the Nagari script and Hindi language. Such a proposal should not sound very impracticable to such inveterate optimists, at any rate, who seriously advance it as a very practical proposal to make Urdu the national language of the Marathas and to expect all our Arya Samaj Gurukuls to study the Vedas in Roman script. The Hindu Mahasabha is a national organization of Hindudom. It has come to my notice that a very large section of the English-educated Hindus hold back from joining the Hindu Mahasabha, and political circles in India and outside in general feel themselves totally unconcerned about it, under the erroneous idea that it is an exclusively religious organization, something like a Christian mission. Nothing could be far from the truth. The Hindu Mahasabha is not a Hindu mission. It leaves religious questions regarding theism, monotheism, pantheism, or even atheism to be discussed and determined by the different Hindu schools of religious persuasions. He clarifies this in the sections we discussed in today's membership live stream as well, that the idea of Hindutva has nothing to do with Hindu religion. I'm not bothered about it. Let theology be discussed by theologians. I'm not concerned about it. It is not a Hindu Dharma Mahasabha, but a Hindu National Mahasabha. Consequently, by its very constitution, it is debarred to associate itself exclusively as a partisan within any particular religious school or sect, even within the Hindu fold. As a national Hindu body, it will of course propagate and defend the National Hindu Church, comprising each and all religions of Hindustani origin, against any non-Hindu attack or encroachment. But the sphere of its activity is far more comprehensive than that of an exclusively religious body. The Hindu Mahasabha identifies itself with the national life of Hindudom in all its entirety, in all its social, economical, cultural, and above all, political aspects, and is pledged to protect and promote all that contributes to the freedom, strength, and glory of the Hindu nation. And as an indispensable means to that end, to attain Purna Swarajya, absolute political independence of Hindustan by all legitimate and proper means. Let me have a sip of tea, which I forgot to sip. It's gone cold now. The Hindu Mahasabha must continue its mission even after Hindustan is politically free. Many a superficial critic seems to fancy that the Mahasabha was only contrived to serve as a make-weight, as a reaction checkmating the Muslim League or the anti-Hindu policy of the present leaders of the Congress, and will be out of court or cease automatically to function as soon as it is shorn of this spurious excuse to exist. But if the aims and objects of the Mahasabha mean anything, it is clear that it was not the outcome of any frothy effusion, any fussy agitation to remove a grievance here or oppose a seasonal party there. The fact is that every organism, whether individual or social, which is living and deserves to survive, throws out offensive and defensive organs as soon as it is brought to face adversely changing environments. The Hindu nation too, as soon as it recovered and freed itself from the suffocating grip of the pseudo-nationalistic ideology of the Congress brand developed a new organ to battle in the struggle for existence under the changed conditions of modern age. This was the Hindu Mahasabha. It grew out of a fundamental necessity of national life and not of any ephemeral incident. The constructive side of its aims and objects make it amply clear that its mission is as abiding as the life of the nation itself. But that part, even the day-to-day necessity of adapting its policy to the ever-changing political currents, makes it incumbent on Hindudom to have an exclusively Hindu organization independent of any moral or intellectual servility or subservience to any non-Hindu or jointly representative institution to guard Hindu interests and save them from being jeopardized. It is not so only under the present political subjection of Hindustan, but it will be all the more necessary to have some such exclusively Hindu organization, some such Hindu Mahasabha in substance, whether it is identical within this present organization or otherwise, to serve as a watchtower at the gates of Hindustan for at least a couple of centuries to come, even after Hindustan is partially or wholly free and a national parliament controls its political destiny. Because unless something altogether cataclysmic in nature upsets the whole political order of things in the world, which practical polities cannot envisage today, all that can be reasonably expected in the immediate future is that we Hindus may prevail over England and compel her to recognize India as a self-governing unit with the status contemplated in the Westminster Statute. Now, a national parliament in such a self-governing India can only reflect the electorate as it is, with the Hindus and the Muslims as we find them, their relations a bit bettered, perhaps a bit worsened. No realist can be blind to the possibility that the extraterritorial designs and the secret urge goading on the Muslims to transform India into a Muslim state may at any time confront the Hindustani state, even under the self-government, either within a civil war or treacherous overtures to alien invaders by the Muslims. Then again, exact semi word for word concerns expressed by Dr. Ambedkar in Pakistan or partition of India. Then again, there is every likelihood that there will ever continue, at least for a century to come, a danger of fanatical riots, the scramble for services, legislative seats, weightages out of proportion to their population on the part of the Muslim minority, and consequently a constant danger threatening internal peace. To checkmate this probability, which if we are wise, we must always keep in view even after Hindustan attains the status of a self-governing country, a powerful and exclusive organization of Hindudom, like the Hindu Mahasabha, will always prove a sure and devoted source of strength, a reserve force for the Hindus to fall back upon, to voice their grievances more effectively than the joint parliament can do, to scent danger ahead, to warn the Hindus in time against it, and to fight out, if need be, any treacherous design to which the joint state itself may unwittingly fall a victim. The history of Canada or Palestine or the movement of the Young Turks will show you that in every state where two or more such conflicting elements as the Hindus and Muslims in India happen to exist as constituents, the wiser of them has to keep its exclusive organization intact, strong, and watchful to defeat any attempt at betrayal or capture of the national state by the opposite party. Especially so if that party has extraterritorial affinities, religious or cultural, with alien bordering states. This tussle between such constituents of such a state must continue till slowly, if ever, they all learn to get themselves merged by developing a spirit of corporate patriotism into a consolidated nation. If the Hindus take this realistic truth to heart, they will try their utmost to consolidate and strengthen the pan-Hindu organization, which is strongly gathering force and has struck its roots deep in the Hindu soil. The nearer you are to Swarajya, the more indispensable grows the necessity of a strong and consolidated pan-Hindu organization, or rather, the stronger grows the pan-Hindu organization, the nearer it takes you to real Swarajya. No, Hindutva not being religion is very important a point, regardless of whether it was inspired from Hindu Dharma or not, because Hindutva is the political or the intellectual defense arm of Hinduism, because most Hindus we know today, or even in West Bengal especially, don't give a shit about Hindu protection, Hindu politics, or Hindu safety, etc. The practical policy of the Hindu movement. I have so far dealt with some of the basic principles and tenets and set out the national and political ideals of the Hindu Sangathan movement as I perceive them. But the very fact that we have still to frame, emphasize, and propagate the very ideals and ideology of the Hindu movement, added to the fact that they imply an entire reorientation of the public activities of the Hindu people so as to revolutionize the conception of the Indian state and its formation as we find it today, shows how we have hardly taken a step ahead and how strenuous and sustained a struggle we have yet to undergo before we are able to realize the goal, the creation of an independent Hindustan as we define it. Once the ideal is fixed, it is this struggle that matters most, and we must therefore chalk out as urgently as possible the lines on which our struggle can be carried on with the greatest effect and, if possible, with the least resistance. It must be noted also that although the ideal remains fixed, the struggle to realize it can scarcely be on a straight line. We have now to confront, now to compromise, now to fight on, now to fall back and keep marking time. At times, we shall have to ally ourselves on a given point with one of our opponents and then to oppose the former ally. This very inconsistency in detail resorted to in a long drawn life and death struggle to reach a goal is consistent enough. But if it leads us on the whole irresistibly onward and onward to the great ideal we aim to realize. The policy I am going to outline should also be viewed from the practicality, matter of factness. He actually uses this phrase, the matter of factness of doing politics, way of doing politics. The policy I am going to outline should also be viewed from this tactical perspective. It is only related to our present circumstances and should not be taken as final. As our movement goes on gathering strength, we may soon arrive at a point when it may march on with irresistible strides of a giant and may grow powerful enough to demand and dictate things with a reckless heroism which the puny beginnings today can hardly conceive or dare to express. I should also make it clear that in outlining this practical policy, I am only expressing my personal views. They cannot bind the Hindu Mahasabha unless they are sanctioned by its corporate resolutions. Point 1. Our first and foremost aim in our political activities must always be to guard the integrity of Hindustan intact. Hindustan to us does not only mean the so-called British India, but comprises even those parts which are under the French and the Portuguese possessions. Gomantak and Pondicherry are as integral parts of our motherland as Maharashtra or Bengal. From the Indus to the Himalayas, from the Himalayas to Tibet, from Tibet to Burma, and from Burma to the southern and western seas run the lines of the boundaries of our land. The whole territory, including Kashmir and Nepal, Gomantak, Pondicherry, and other French possessions, constitutes our national and territorial unit and must be consolidated in a free and centralized state. It must ever remain undivided and indivisible. Any attempt to divide this territorial and national unity of Hindustan, so as, for example, to break it up into Hindu and Muslim zones, must be opposed tooth and nail and chastised as an act of treason and treachery towards our neighboring states of Burma. Mic distance, theek hai kya? To our neighboring states of Burma and Tibet on the eastern and northeastern frontiers, our policy will always be, so far as possible, of wholehearted friendship and, if they choose, even of a political alliance. They are our co-religionists and our political interests too are not inherently antagonistic. Nay, we will only find in general our mutual political strength augmented if we continue to be political allies. But he, of course, did not live to see the day when Bhutan, also being our co-religionist in Savarkar's way, kicked out Hindus and created an exodus of Nepali Hindus. But towards those Muslim states and tribes which border our northwest frontier, our policy cannot but be a guarded one. Their tendency for centuries in the past had been fanatically inimical towards the Hindus and is likely to continue to be so for at least a century to come. The Hindu Sanghathanist party must always see that this frontier is garrisoned with overwhelming Hindu troops and is never entrusted to Muslim ones. We will always be ready to establish friendly contact with those bordering states and shall give no cause for unnecessary strife, but should keep our forces there always in a state of war and vigilant to resist any sudden aggressive eruption in the part of those Muslim tribes or any threatened invasion through the passes by any anti-Hindu alien army. To the independent Hindu kingdom of Nepal, all Hindudom feels itself most loyally attached and would ever strive to strain ever strive to strain every nerve in defending its honor and integrity. It is the only part of our motherland which continues down to this day as a dharmashetra unsullied by the humiliating shadow of an alien non-Hindu flag. The independence of the Hindu kingdom of Nepal, the home of a heroic Hindu race, constitutes at once the pride and center of Hindu hope. Every atom of strength added to Nepal elevates and strengthens the prestige and position of Hindudom all around. On the other hand, anything that weakens or humiliates Hindudom in any other part of Hindustan must weaken the strength of Nepal in the long run. The danger of the Muslim upheaval on the northwestern frontier, for example, cannot but be a standing menace to the independence of the Hindu kingdom in Nepal too. If Hindu history has not endowed us even with this much foresight, then it must be said that all the lessons which the invasions of Ghaznis and Ghoris were meant by destiny to teach us are lost on us. Nevertheless, it will be foolish on our part to do anything to drag Nepal into the muddled and slogan-ridden politics which disfigures the British Indian territory. The politics of a subject race can be no guide to the exigencies of an independent kingdom situated as Nepal. I therefore feel no hesitation whatsoever in justifying the present policy of the Nepal government to maintain friendly relations with the British government and to continue an informal political alliance with the British with a view to guard against any other non-Hindu aggression on India. What a practical man. He's saying कि भाई वो अपने आप पे खेल रहा है, वो हमारे जैसा सब्जेक्ट नेशन नहीं है, तो उसका जियोपॉलिटिकल इंटरेस्ट तो अलग होगा ही, उसका नेशनल इंटरेस्ट अलग होगा ही, तो आई हैव नो क्वाल्म्स विद दैट. Consequently, it is also a very wise policy on the part of Nepal to supply as many Nepalese recruits to the Indian forces as it is possible to do in conformity with its own security and strength. The political complications in Europe and the Far East are almost sure to persuade the British government too to depend more and more on Nepal's friendship and military help to secure Indian defense. In this connection, it must be emphasized that the British government should also restore some of those territories on the borders of Nepal which the British had wrested from her in the past back to the King of Nepal. Such a step will cement the friendship between the two nations as nothing else can do. Nepal has doubtlessly a great future before her if she takes the time by the forelock and has the prophetic vision which a rising nation must necessarily possess. She must bring up her military strength to an up-to-date European efficiency and must be able to defend herself not only on land but against any aerial aggression too by equipping herself with a powerful aerial force. You see so many examples of Savarkar never saying that who cares what the West says, who cares what happens in the West. Her strength being the strength of an ally, the British government too is not likely under the present circumstances to hamper her in this attempt with any feeling of uneasiness, but would rather wish her to hasten on this project. The influence which Nepal is likely to exercise on Indian politics in the near future will be better pointed out in the words of Mr. Percival Langdon, the well-known author of the voluminous work on Nepal. Says Mr. Langdon, quote, it invests Nepal with an importance which it would be foolish to overlook. Englishmen should attempt to understand a little more thoroughly the high position which Nepal holds in the general Southern Asiatic balance and the great and growing importance that she will possess in future in the solution of the problems which beset the present state of India. Predictions did not come true. Nepal stands today on the threshold of a new light. Her future calls her in one direction and one only. In all the varied theatres of Indian politics, there is nothing which surpasses in interest the ultimate destiny of Nepal. Inevitably, she will become of greater and greater importance if we persist in our present policy of lessening British influence in India. It is not impossible that Nepal may even be called upon to control the destiny of India itself. The National Constitution of Hindustan, the Hindu Sanghatanist Party aims to base the future constitution of Hindustan on the broad principle that all citizens should have equal rights and obligations, irrespective of caste or creed, race or religion, provided they avow and owe an exclusive and devoted allegiance to the Hindustan state. The fundamental rights of liberty of speech, liberty of conscience, of worship, of association, etc. will be enjoyed by all citizens alike. Whatever restrictions will be imposed on them in the interest of public peace and order of national emergency will not be based on any religious or racial considerations alone, but on common national grounds. No attitude can be more national, even in the territorial sense, than this. And it is this attitude in general which is expressed in substance by the curt formula of one man, one vote. This will make it clear that the conception of a Hindu nation is in no way inconsistent with the development of a common Indian nation, a united Hindustani state in which all sects and sections, races and religions, castes and creeds, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Anglo-Indians, etc., could be harmoniously welded together into a political state on terms of perfect equality. This attitude, and he does not mean communism, by the way, he means equality of opportunity. This attitude, which the Hindu Mahasabha takes up with regard to the national Hindustani constitution, is in fact more definitely and expressively national than either the League or even the Congress, which calls itself Indian national, has as yet dared to take up uncompromisingly. And it is the Hindu Mahasabha and the conception of the Hindu nation which is tabooed by the Congress and the League as most dangerously anti-national and uncompromisingly communal. The fact is that the National Congress itself is not only communal in its legitimate sense, but perversely communal inasmuch as it recognizes a majority and a minority, the Hindus and the Muslims, and on top of it all, forces the majority to forego its just share in the franchise, in the public services, in cultural rights, and offers them to a minority based on religion to buy its patriotism and attachment to the common national state. On the other hand, by asking for the Muslims as a religious entity wanton advantages over and above what they are entitled to on a national basis, at the cost of the Hindus at the point of a dagger, with a threat to secede and join hands with an alien power, the Muslim League takes up a position which is anti-national to the point of treachery. In demanding 3 votes for the Muslim League is outrageously communal, while in calling upon the Hindus to yield to this demand and accede to the proposal of 1 vote for 3 Hindus, the Congress is cowardly communal. And yet it is precisely these 2 bodies, the pseudo-national Congress and the confessedly anti-national League, which have the temerity to accuse the Hindu Sangatanist party as communalistic and anti-national, simply because they are not ready to betray their birthright for a mess of pottage, to play second fiddle to the Muslims or care for a worthless certificate from the Congressites of being nationalistic, the rights of non-Hindu minorities. When once the Hindu Mahasabha not only accepts but maintains the principles of one man, one vote, and the public services to go by merit alone. Fuck. Hindutva is most at home with libertarianism. When once the Hindu Mahasabha not only accepts but maintains the principles of one man, one vote, and the public services to go by merit alone, added to the fundamental rights and obligations to be shared by all citizens alike, irrespective of any distinction of race or religion, any further mention of minority rights is on principle not only unnecessary but self-contradictory. Yes, it's grammatically wrong to give minority rights at the same time say that no laws are going to be harming anyone just on the basis of religion, caste or creed. Then why do you need extra minority rights? Hindutva is inherently libertarianism, at least the way Savarkar saw it. And it's self-contradictory because it again introduces a consciousness of majority and minority on communal basis. But as practical politics require, and as the Hindu Sangatanists want to relieve our non-Hindu countrymen of even a ghost of suspicion, we are prepared to emphasize that the legitimate rights of minorities with regard to their religion, culture, and language will be expressly guaranteed on one condition only, that the equal rights of the majority also must not in any case be encroached upon or abrogated. Every minority may have separate schools to train their children in their own tongue, their own religious or cultural institutions, and can receive government help also for these. Yeah, our Indian state followed only these aspects of Savarkar, but always in proportion to the taxes they pay into the common exchequer. Lol. Okay. The same principle must of course hold good in case of the majority too. Over and above this, in case the constitution is not based on joint electorates and on the unalloyed national principle of one man one vote, but is based on communal basis, if that happens, then those minorities who wish to have separate electorate or reserved seats will be allowed to have them, but always in proportion to their population, and provided that it does not deprive the majority also of an equal right in proportion to its population too. So you see, a libertarian anarcho-capitalist almost kind of decentralized state where you have your commune, you have your absolute mullah neighborhood. I believe that our Christian, Parsi, Jewish and other minorities except the Muslims will be perfectly satisfied with the constitution based on these principles as broadly outlined above. Because the Christians, the Jews and most eminently the Parsis are too allied to us in culture and too patriotic, while the Anglo-Indians too sensible to fail to see that no constitution, if it has to keep the integrity, sovereignty and strength of the national state safe, can go any further. And that is all that is really required to safeguard any genuine special interests of the minorities as distinguished from those of the majority. Only that minority will insist to have still more and yet more to the last pound of flesh, which in fact cherishes secret designs to disintegrate the state, to create a state within a state, or altogether to subvert the national state and hold all others under its subjection. Fortunately, no section of our countrymen belonging to the non-Muslim minorities mentioned above harbors this treasonable design. It is only with regard to the Muslim minority that this cannot be asserted with confidence, and therefore I shall deal separately with it later on. In this connection, a point of far-reaching importance and one which has a very serious bearing on the political and religious and cultural interest of the Christian, Jew and Parsi countrymen of ours in particular must be mentioned in bold relief. The anti-national and aggressive designs on the part of the Muslim minority constitute a danger to all non-Muslim Indians in India, and not only to the Hindus alone. It is too clear a point to require any further elucidation here. It is the anti-national attitude of the Muslim minority alone which is giving a handle to the British government to obstruct further political and constitutional progress in Hindustan. But in order to camouflage their own special responsibility for this guilt, the Muslims always try to drag in other minorities also in support of their attitude, and want the world to believe that all non-Hindu minorities are as determinedly uncompromising in the anti-national demands advanced by the Muslim League. The League always wants to pose as the champion of all non-Hindu minorities, but the fact is that the relations of Christians, Jews and above all our Parsi brethren have been for centuries most cordial with us Hindus, and these non-Muslim minorities have never advanced any anti-national or unreasonable claims or had ever indulged in political hooliganism or fanatical riots as a silly means to impress their political importance. My earnest suggestion therefore to our Christians, Jews, Parsis and such other non-Muslim minorities would be that they should openly and definitely disown the League designs, protest against being bracketed with the Muslims under the misleading and mischievous common term minorities, call upon the Muslim League not to speak in general on their behalf, and above all, should definitely declare through their respective political organizations that they are perfectly willing and contented to form a common national front with the Hindus under the conditions referred to above. But if the Christians, the Jews, the Parsis and all non-Muslim minorities and the Hindus present a common understanding and a common front at any would-be round-table conference or constitutional assembly, the Muslims will find themselves singularly isolated and will be forced to cease to speak in the name of the minority problem, but will have to shoulder by themselves the responsibility of their anti-national and fanatical claims. These supercilious pretensions of Muslims of being a chosen minority and the bluff of claiming political importance and historical traditions, investing them with an incomparable superiority to the Indian people in general, constitutes a challenge and an insult to our Christians, Jews, Parsis and other countrymen too. The Hindu Mahasabha and the Congress, I have no space here nor the inclination to frame a charge sheet against the Congress enumerating the grievous errors it has been committing under the dictatorship of Gandhiji and the leadership of his persuasion ever since the Khilafat agitation, setting at naught even the protests of such eminent Hindu patriots as Lokmanya Tilak, Lala Lajpat Rai, Swami Shraddhanand and others, which errors have weakened and humiliated Hindudom at every step. I have no inclination to do so or condemn them even in such harsh terms as the gravity of the errors in fact demand, because I know that some of them have rendered eminent services to our motherland and many of them meant well. Although the Congress as a body has been ungrateful to a degree in failing to appreciate the patriotic sacrifice and service the Hindu Mahasabhaists have rendered equally with, and in cases even far more intensely than the Congressites in the fight for the freedom of Hindustan, yet let every Hindu Sangatanist be just and generous in brotherly appreciation of the patriotic motives of those of the Congressites who had been highly selfless and sacrificing. It is not their motive but their judgment, and in a couple of cases, a monomaniac incompetence, which was responsible for the erroneous policy they persisted in, which has done incalculable harm to the Hindu cause, and which, if not checkmated, is likely to jeopardize not only the legitimate interests of Hindudom far more dangerously than in the past, but even the vital interests of the Indian nation too, quote unquote Indian nation too, as the Congress itself understands it and loves so well. It is not therefore to rake up fruitlessly the sad memories of the most grievous errors which the Congressites committed in their identification with the Khilafat agitation, but to warn against the imminent dangers of a similar type, that I must refer to a few facts regarding the attitude of the Gandhiist politicians in that ill-fated movement. In spite of the warnings of the great Tilak, Gandhiji committed the Congress to the purely communal, religious and extraterritorial Khilafat agitation to placate the Muslims, and himself went to the length of insisting on the point that the question of Swaraj itself should be subordinated to the Khilafat issue. Nay, he said it was the religious duty of the Hindus to help the Khalifa, and yet the same Congress leaders forbade the Congress even to touch the Nizam's civil resistance movement as a thing unclean, and denounced it as communal because it demanded the religious and cultural rights of Hindus. Not only that, but true to their words, these Congressite Hindu leaders did not subordinate Swaraj to the Khilafat question only in its figurative aspect, but were hand in glove with the Muslim leaders who instigated Amir Amanullah Khan to invade India, as he actually did. We have the word of Swami Shraddhanandji for it. The Swamiji publicly wrote to that effect in protest in his Liberator, his magazine, I guess, called Liberator, and produced some documentary evidence and a draft telegram in Gandhiji's handwriting to the Amir, which Maulana Muhammad Ali had shown to Swamiji. In his own Young India, Gandhiji admitted that the Afghans, if successful, were sure to establish their kingdom in India. And yet these Congressite Hindu leaders did not dissociate themselves from the Muslim leaders in their open and secret activities to egg on the Afghan invasion, but on the contrary, promised support to this treacherous move. Gandhiji writes in his Young India, I would in a sense certainly assist the Amir of Afghanistan if he waged war against the British government by openly telling my countrymen that it would be a crime to help the government, etc. End quote. If you like to see the length these gentlemen had gone in this affair, you may read a useful tract recently published by Mr. Karandikar of Pune, which is full of original extracts from the speeches and writings of the then Congress leaders and Gandhiji's Young India. What is most surprising to note is the fact that these Hindu leaders outbid even the Ali brothers, the quote-unquote national Maulana Azad, and other Muslim leaders in maintaining that if the Amir succeeded in capturing Delhi, we would have won Swaraj. For they definitely stated that the rule of the Afghans was in itself a Swaraj. We Hindu Muslims are one and an indivisible nation. I vividly remember conversations I had with these Hindu leaders of Gandhist persuasion when they used to meet me then in prison. How expectantly they waited for the invading armies of the Amir to capture Lahore. Well, after all, the Khilafat was guillotined by the Turks themselves, and Amir Amanullah, instead of being emperor at Delhi, was dethroned by a Bacha Suku in Kabul itself. And all that India reaped from the Khilafat agitation was the intensified pan-Islamic fanaticism roused by that movement amongst the Indian Muslims all over India, aided and abetted by the Hindus themselves, who paid dearly for their folly there, and then in Malabar, Kohat, Punjab, Bengal, and will have yet to pay unless they learn to react. While the Khilafat was on his brain, in a reply he gave to the correspondent of the Daily Express, London, Gandhiji disclosed his plan of converting the Afghans from fanatical turbulence into a peaceful citizenship. Thus, quote, I would introduce the spinning wheel amongst the Afghan tribes also, and then that will prevent them from attacking in Indian territory. I feel the tribesmen are in their own way God-fearing people, end quote. So you see the problem. Yes, quote unquote, in their own way. That is the trouble. For we can clearly discern their own way of God-fearingness in the ghastly light of Hindu habitations set on fire throughout the frontier line from Sindh to Kashmir. Only Hindus looted, only Hindus killed, only Hindu women and men kidnapped. Is not a fakir also a God-fearing man in his own way, and the spinning wheel to persuade them from attacking India? How many centuries after, sir? And what are we Hindus to do in the meanwhile? To garrison the frontiers with hosts of Hindu damsels with the charm of spinning wheel in their hands, as Gandhiji has suggested quite seriously at one of the sittings of the Roundtable Conference? Well, gentlemen, I am not referring to these few details in any light mood. I want you to realize the mentality and the ideology of these Hindu leaders who still happen to be at the helm of the Congress. Neither Gandhiji nor Pandit Nehru, nay, not even Subhash Babu or Mr. Ray, who, although they do not contribute in any way to some of the above vagaries of the Gandhi school, are still votaries, I call it victims of the school of thought, which says in so many words, give to the Muslims so much that they would not wish to ask for anything more. They may sincerely believe that to be the crux of nationalism and wisdom, but do you, who do not wish to see Hindudom humiliated or browbeaten into servility, believe it to be so? If not, are you going to authorize these very gentlemen by electing and returning them as representatives who can speak in the name of the Hindus once again at any roundtable conference to come, to enter into any new pact with the Muslims on behalf of the Hindus, or entrust the destiny of the northwestern frontiers into the hands of the Khan brothers, who are the Congress plenipotentiaries and Gandhiji's certified lieutenants there, as once the Ali brothers were? I call upon those thousands of Hindus also who have not ceased to be Hindus but who still follow the Congress with a blind habitual trait to ponder as seriously as possible on these questions. After the Khilafat came the blank checks, then the communal award or decision. Lapses of memory make the Congress leaders call it sometimes this way, sometimes that, but which always remains definitely unrejected and in fact accepted and worked out by them. Then rushed in the flood of circulars issued by Congress ministers in all provinces. Mr. Pant, for example, assuring the Muslims, amongst other things, and I quote his words, quote, at Barabanki, the Congress government stopped Hindus from doing arti in their own temples and blowing conch shells during the whole period of Muharram, and at several places during the Holi, the Hindus were prevented from sprinkling colored water even on Hindus amongst themselves. At Jaunpur, the district magistrate was attacked by Muslims, but the accused were released on the recommendation of the secretary of the Muslim League. The Congress government has given representation to the Muslims out of all proportion to their numerical strength, which came up to only 14%. But out of the 4 collectors appointed by the Congress government, 3 were Muslims, and out of 13 deputy collectors, 8 were Muslims. So on and so on. Every Hindu should read this whole circular issued by the UP Congress government. It is a masterpiece of self-condemnation. It was secretly circulated only amongst the Muslims, but the Hindu Sabhaists, those cursed communalist traitors, got hold of some copies of this, our national confession, and broadcasted its reprints. Space forbids me from quoting from other circulars issued by the provincial Congress government in CP, Madras, etc., all fashioned after the same pattern, pleading in substance before the tribunal of the Muslim League, saying, sir, we have deprived the Hindus everywhere of what is due to them and given Muslims overwhelmingly more than was due, oppressed the Hindus as best as we could wherever the Muslims were pleased to demand it. So let the League be pleased, therefore, sir, to certify that the Congress ministers were truly impartial and perfectly national. End quote. And the Muslim League has certified at last by observing the day of deliverance from the Congress tyranny under which the Muslims groaned for the past too long enduring years in a way. It was a tyranny. For in all those provinces where the Muslims were only 7 to 12% in numerical strength, the Congress gave them posts in the stingy proportion of 40 to 75% only in education. Police and other administrative departments where they ought to have got cent% in consideration of their historical importance for their being the direct communal descendants of the Mughal emperors. Has not even Lord Zetland referred to the warlike qualities of the Muslims only this month and reminded the Congressite Hindus that the Muslim emperors rule all over India for a time, implying thereby that the Muslims were therefore some superior beings to the Hindus. It was fortunate that his lordship was never sent in his early youth to any primary Maratha school, otherwise he would have been deprived of the advantage of that argument by little more knowledge of the fate of that Muslim empire, how the avenging hosts of Hindus had beaten to a chip the forces of these quote unquote warlike Muslims in 100 battlefields, smashed to pieces this self-same Mughal empire, rearing up an independent Hindu empire on the ashes of Muslim pride and power, and held the Mughal emperors as prisoners and pensioners in their hands. But it is no use now on the part of our Congress friends to fulminate against this latest move of the Muslim League. The Deliverance Day of today is but the inevitable logical consequence of the Khilafat Day, so gaily observed by the Congress yesterday. It is you who have initiated the Muslims into the belief that the more they demand, the more you yield. The more they frown, the more you placate. The more they pocket, the more you offer. The more thankless they grow, the more afflicted you are with craving for their thanks. Did you not offer them blank checks? Why then get startled now? Now that they begin to fill them up with whatever ransom they are pleased to demand. Dr. Munje, Bhai Paramanand, and other leaders of the Hindu Mahasabha protested against the Khilafat policy, against your blank checks, against your meaningless neither accept, quote unquote, neither accept nor reject vagaries. But you then denounce them all as wicked communalists. Look down even upon Shivaji and Pratap as misguided patriots, because they conquered by the sword and you gave yourself out as the new messiahs who have come to conquer by love alone, as world guides in direct communications with the inner voice. And now how pitiable it is to find you so sorely afflicted for want of guidance for yourselves, to find out a way to appease and win over by love alone a single individual, the president of the league, that you should stand imploring at the gates of all the British governors and the viceroys to lend you a helping hand. Then again, whenever it happened that some British authorities or leaders referred to the policy of the Hindu Mahasabha on a point here or there with a tinge of appreciation, our Congress nationalists used to exclaim in righteous indignation, "There! What more proof is required to expose the anti-national guilt of these Hindu Mahasabhite communalists than the fact that the British people should appreciate their policy on this or that point?" And now there is a regular scramble amongst these nationalist Congress leaders to secure and flourish in the face of the world certificates of appreciation from the British governors and the viceroys to prove that the Congress ministers were, after all, not so bad and had served under the British government to its satisfaction. Moreover, it is also very funny to observe that those very Congress leaders who blamed the Hindu Sangatanists whenever they claimed the legitimate protection from the British government against the Muslim outrages on the frontier or in Malabar or in Bengal should now be vying with each other in calling upon governors and the viceroy to arbitrate as the best judges and save the Congress prestige by declaring it not guilty in the very, very serious case framed against them by the Muslim League. Is it not now anti-national to appeal to the British, the third party, the outsiders, to step in to settle our internal differences which we may have with our quote-unquote Muslim countrymen, quote-unquote our Muslim countrymen? तो अब मुझले का कौन दे रहा है? It is also instructive and therefore necessary to point out here that this theory of the quote-unquote third party also constituted a Congress superstition which was responsible for so many of its errors. They always used to fancy that the Muslims, if left to themselves, would never have indulged in any anti-national ulterior anti-Hindu designs. The Muslims, including Messrs. Jinnah, Fazlul Haq and Hayat Khan, were very simple-minded folk, incapable of any political subterfuges, and as devotees of Islamic peace and goodwill, had no aggressive political aims of their own against the Hindus. Nay, even the frontier tribes, the quote-unquote brave brothers Moplas, the Muslim populations in Bengal or Sindh, who indulge in such horrible outrages against Hindus, have no taste for it all, nursed within themselves, but were almost compelled to rise and revolt against the Hindus by the quote-unquote the third party, the Britishers. When the British did not step in, we Hindus and Muslims lived together in perfect amity and brotherly concord, and Hindu-Muslim riots were a thing simply unheard of. Thousands of Congressite Hindus are observed to have been duped into the silliest of political superstitions. As if Muhammad Qasim, Ghazni's, Ghodis, Alauddin's, Aurangzeb's were all instigated by the British, by this third party, to invade and lay waste Hindu India with a mad fanatical fury. As if the history of the last 10 centuries of perpetual war between the Hindus and Muslims was an interpolation and a myth. As if the Alis or Mr. Jinnah or Sir Sikandar were mere school children to be spoiled with the offer of sugar pills by the British vagabonds in the class and persuaded to throw stones at the house of their neighbors. They say, Before the British came, Hindu-Muslim riots were a thing unheard of. But because instead of riots, Hindu-Muslim wars were the order of the day. But supposing for a while, what the Gandhiists maintain, that it is this third party, the British, who are solely responsible for hypnotizing Muslims into anti-Hindu and anti-national tendencies. How is it that Gandhiji and his Congressite lieutenants are invoking the very third party, the British governors and the viceroys, to act as arbitrators, to judge whether the Congress was really guilty of the accusations leveled by the Muslim League against it? Is the leading abettor the best person to arbitrate? To request him, whom you accuse as the leading instigator, to investigate into the crime? Okay, ब्रिटिश के वजह से हो रहा है ना हिंदू मुस्लिम झमेला, और तुम ब्रिटिश को ही बोल रहे हो कि आओ भाई एडजुडिकेट करो, डिसाइड करो कि कौन यहाँ पे सही है कौन गलत है. To request him, whom you accuse as the leading instigator, to investigate into the crime. If the Congress superstition was true, then the British are sure to adjust the award in a way to intensify the ill will and distrust between the Congressite and the League, so as to undermine yet further any chances of Hindu-Muslim understanding and concord. So then, either your third-party theory was wrong and superstitious, or you have obviously bungled in approaching the very mischief-making third party to arbitrate. The simple fact which Congressite Hindus would do well to make a note of even now, and which would spare them from a series of such inconsistent and bungling steps, is that the Muslim religion, theocratic traditions and history all imbue them with inherent ambition of Islamic political sovereignty. The British policy at times, when it suits British interests, does of course act as a match, but the explosive magazine is genuinely Muslim. It could be held in check, but woe to him who overlooks its existence and dupes himself into the belief that the match itself was the magazine. If not the British make, any other match may serve the same purpose. Nay, spontaneous combustion is also its particular characteristic. Secondly, the Muslims are practical politicians to a fault, so they in general yield to and ally instinctively with the stronger, even if he be their worst opponent. That is why most Muslims never vote for Muslim parties these days, even if he be their worst opponent, and continue to bully the weaker. Has not England reduced them to a subject race in India and elsewhere? But today, England is the stronger of the two. So they will fawn on England and continue to aggrandize against the Hindus. If tomorrow the Hindus grow stronger, they will be yielding to Hindus too and will behave Hindus as brothers, as they did in Maharashtra and Punjab in the days of the Peshwas or Ranjit Singh. That is why this quote-unquote Hindu-Muslim riots were a thing unheard of in days gone by, to quote the Congressite slogan. The best way to counteract the League's day of deliverance is for the Congress to observe the day of rectification. In all sincerity, I request my Congressite brothers that instead of fulminating against the move of the League, or what is more likely, especially in the case of Gandhi's group, instead of being yet more browbeaten, the best way would be to take it as an effective eye opener and arrest their steps once for all on the dangerous path they were treading. They should simply refuse to have any further dealing with the Muslims as Muslims. Yes, that is the main point. Let the Indian National Congress rectify that fundamental mistake and be once more the real Indian National Congress as it claims to be. Let it be absolutely consistent with its own ideal of territorial nationalism and begin with a clean slate. Let it proclaim once for all that it stands by these principles alone. Firstly, it recognizes no Muslim as a Muslim, or Christian as a Christian, or Hindu as a Hindu, but looks upon them all and deals with them all as Indians only, and therefore will have nothing to do with any special communal, religious or racial interests as apart from the fundamental interests guaranteed to all citizens alike. State incentivization of religiosity बंद करो भोसरी के, यही लिबर्टेरियन टॉकिंग पॉइंट भी है जो मैं बोल रहा हूँ लास्ट कुछ महीनों से. वो अब देख रहे हो कि सावरकर एग्जैक्टली वही बोल रहे थे इन ऑलमोस्ट पैराफ्रेजिंग. Secondly, it does not acknowledge any other constitutional principle with regard to electorates than the rule one man, one vote, and public services to go by merit alone. Another libertarian talking point. Only one alternative it may condescend to subscribe in view of particular situation in India, to the effect that if communal representation is to be resorted to at all, then it must strictly be in relation to the numerical strength of the constituents, and in the public services too, that relation may be observed, but only insofar as it is consistent with merit. He's saying that in public services, even if there is a communal award, because if you have to bow down, if you do bow down to communal award type of a situation, communal representation situation, even then it has to be consistent with merit. So if you say that no, I will hire 50 Muslims in a group of 60 IAS officers, all 50 Muslims have to be absolutely awesome IAS officers, although awesome IAS officer might be a oxymoron. Thirdly, and above all, so long as such a national and just constitution could not be had, let the Congress resist the temptation of participating in any election whatsoever under a constitution which is deliberately meant to divide the integrity of the Indian people, and is not only used on communal divisions but is most unjustly harmful to the majority community, and constitutes a standing instigation to the Muslim minority to act against the nation as a whole, as the present constitution aims to do. So long as there are separate electorates for the Muslims and the general, which in fact means the Hindus, then let the Muslim League and the Hindu Mahasabha participate in the elections, and let the Congress stand supremely aloof as a truly Indian national body which can never condescend to identify itself with any particular communal electorate. But if the Congress takes courage in both hands, rectifies its past and anti-Hindu and anti-national attitude, and takes up the stand I have suggested above, the prestige of the Congress as a truly national organization will immediately be enhanced. In that case, it will regain in general the wholehearted confidence of the Hindu Mahasabha at any rate. But it can on no account continue to play the double-faced game of getting elected on behalf of the Hindu electorate as Hindus and betray the legitimate interests of the Hindus as nationalists. It can no longer hunt with the hound and run with the hare. Otherwise, the Muslims are bound to continue, and rightly so, to look upon it as a Hindu body, while the Hindus will look upon it, and rightly too, as a pseudo-nationalistic nuisance, dangerous to the Hindu cause as well as the Indian national one. May I hope that the Congress will open its eyes, even if it does even now, if it is not yet too late, as my friend Mr. Ketkar proposes in the Maratha of Pune, Maratha meaning the magazine Maratha of Pune or the newspaper. Let the Congress observe a day of rectification to counteract the League's day of deliverance, proclaim the truly national orientation suggested above, and write to the League the last word, closing all further correspondence, saying, sirs, if you come, with you; if you do not, without you; and if you oppose, in spite of you. We shall continue the good fight to free our Hindustan as best as we can. And in case our Muslim friends want to have a royal commission to define their rights, let the Congress tell them uncompromisingly, quote, say this, that if you want to have a resort to any independent arbitration, well, then the highest tribunal of that nature can be but the League of Nations, which has already framed a public law with regard to the rights of minorities all over the world. The case of Indian minorities also should be referred to the League. In fact, had the Congress taken up this stand as uncompromisingly as possible, and as Dr. Munjay had already suggested, then at the roundtable conference, things could never have drifted in this wild way. The Hindu Mahasabha will have to frame a detailed program of its economic policy in the near future when it issues its electoral manifesto. All that I can do now is to suggest a few broad principles as space forbids dilation. Firstly, it must be remembered that man is not altogether an economical being. It has been well said by Christ that man does not live by bread alone. As it is spiritually true, it is also true in the racial, cultural, national, and several other aspects that go to constitute the human nature. Therefore, opium to rahega hi thoda bahut. Therefore, the attempt to interpret all human history and human activities in economical terms alone is altogether one-sided and amounts to maintaining that man has no other urge in him to live but hunger. Besides hunger, the problem of bread, man has other appetites as fundamental as that: sensual, intellectual, sentimental, some natural, some acquired, some personal, some social, and his being is a complex one. So also is his history. Man has a stomach, but the stomach is not man. Therefore, the solution that is sometimes suggested to the effect that the economical community of interest provides the only and the best solvent of all religious, racial, national, and other antipathies that divide mankind in the world is as superficial as simple. The fact that in Europe, the very races and nations wherein the prophets of this school arose and preached, and where giant efforts were made to revolutionize all human institutions and recast them into the economical mold alone, religious, racial, and national differences have been assuming formidable proportions and have been persisting to assert themselves in Germany, Italy, France, Poland, England, Spain, etc., in spite of centuries of the most intense propaganda to insist on economical community of interest, is enough to prove that you cannot altogether eliminate all religious or racial or national factors at the stroke, at a thought. Those who advance the easy argument that if but you persuade all to unite on the economical plane and to forget every other superstitious difference as racial, cultural, etc., they forget themselves that the very but in their argument rebuts the practical utility at any rate, apart from its theoretical soundness. This is the problem with the low libertarians and anti-Hindutva libertarians. Consequently, the Hindu Sangatanists must in no case delude themselves with the belief that the economical program alone will suffice to solve all cultural, racial, and national dangers that threaten them throughout India. Secondly, they should remember that economical questions too are inextricably bound up under the circumstances obtaining India with religious and racial implications. There are thousands of examples which the workers in the Hindu Sangatanist field know through experience that if a Hindu takes to a particular trade which happens to be the monopoly of Muslims, he is persecuted. A new Hindu Pinjari or Tangewala is threatened at several places with death. Witness the fact that Muslim dacoits who attack cities and villages on the frontiers and loot them proclaim at drumbeats, quote, "We will only loot Hindus, no Muslim shopkeepers or moneylenders will we touch," end quote. Hundreds and hundreds of cases of this type could be cited. Now, how are you to afford immediate relief to these Hindus unless by organizing them as Hindus? Muslim police, as Muslims, defend them not. It is clearly a religious, racial, and cultural plague, and only the patient economical pills can afford no cure. To preach to these millions of fanatics, for example, the rioters in Sukkur district, that their economical interests are one with the Hindus and thus convert them into human brotherhood, well, let them try who like it. But how many centuries will it take? But what are the Hindus to do in the meanwhile? It is just to match the monomaniac remedy of Gandhiji, the spinning wheel, by which he wants to convert the whole world into ahimsa and make it resort to eternal disarmament. Yet, let the wise mouse himself be asked to put into practice his excellent suggestion to bell the cat, and let all others in the meanwhile take to other practical contrivances and steps to save themselves. Consequently, leaving aside the doctrinaire solution of a human economical front, or the airy hopes that if but we insist on the economical community of interest of all alike and unite all Indians at any rate on the economical plane alone, all religious, the commie arguments basically, all religious, racial, national and cultural animosities will vanish like a mist. Bhatel ladai jaten na. We Hindu Sangatanists should, as practical politicians, restrict our immediate economical program to the economical advance of the Hindu national alone, which is libertarianism, bro. Taking into consideration the special circumstances obtaining in India and the stage of social progress, the only school of economics which will suit our requirements in the immediate future is the school of nationalistic economy. To express all the lending factors of our economical policy in a suitable formula, I should like to style it as the policy of national coordination of class interests. This is the economical flank of the Hindu Sangatanist platform. Page thoda tut gaya. Our immediate economical policy, the national coordination of class interests. A. We shall first of all welcome the machine. This is a machine age. The handicrafts will of course have their due place and encouragement, but national production will be on the biggest possible machine scale. Manufacturing hoga, which means no chutia labor laws. Or maybe he advocates them, who knows? Because if he advocates for absolute fucking commie things, I would not give a shit and I would forgive him. Because back then it was not a proven fact that communism and socialism doesn't work. It is a proven fact today. B. The peasantry and the working class form literally the chief source of national wealth, health and strength as well. For a stalwart army also has for its recruit depot to depend chiefly on these very classes which supply the nation with the first two requisites. Therefore, every effort will be made to reinvigorate them and the villages which are their cradle. It's not the case anymore. Peasants and laborers must be enabled to have their share in the distribution of wealth to such an extent as to enable them not only with a bare margin of existence, but touch the average scale of a comfortable life, which never happens because they lose all motivation of innovation, and therefore all incentive to progress goes away and therefore leads to poverty. Nevertheless, it must be remembered that they too, being a part and parcel of the nation as a whole, must share obligations and responsibilities and therefore can only receive their share in such a way as is consistent with the general development and security of the national industry, manufacture and wealth in general. So be happy with the salary then. Salary के अलावा और कुछ नहीं चाहिए. C. As the national capital is under the present circumstances mainly individual and indispensable for the development of national industry and manufacture, it also will receive due encouragement and recompense, not with the hands of incompetent babus, but the interests of both the capital and labor will be subordinated to the requirement of the nation as a whole. Yes. If an industry is flourishing, the profits will be shared in a large portion by the laborers, and then the industry will shut down. But on the contrary, if it is a losing concern, not only the capitalists, but to a certain extent, even the laborer will have to be satisfied with diminishing returns, so that the national industry as such may not altogether be undermined by the overbearing attitude of the selfish class interests of either the capitalists or laborers. Both of his ideas are not going to work, were never going to work in any case, because firstly, he's saying that let's say those jute mill factories, they first of all demanded those things, that exactly what Savarkar first advocates for, that इतना प्रॉफिट है तो और पैसा दो, और पैसा दो, और पैसा दो, और पैसा दो, बार बार बोलने के वजह से जब कंपनी का माँ बहन हो गया और या फिर माँ बहन होने वाला है, ऐसा सिचुएशन आ जाता है, तब सावरकर बोल रहे हैं कि नो, then you can't, now you shut the fuck up and only take whatever salary is available to you. But because you gave them the right to complain and bitch in the first place, that's how the company got fucked. And after which Savarkar recommends that we'll have to enforce a situation where they now can't speak up or even change companies and have to work in that one nationalized factory where they don't get paid anymore or is on the verge of getting shut down. Okay, so on the economics front, there needs to be choice, which Savarkar doesn't advocate and was going to be proven wrong. He just didn't know it back then. These are all wishful thinkings कि अच्छा ये कर देंगे और हम ये अग्री पॉइंट कर लेंगे, ये लॉ होगा, ये हो जाएगा. ऐसा नहीं होता इकोनॉमी में. Laborers, either the capitalists or laborers. In short, the claims of the capital and labor, but he was different from commies in the sense that he was not speaking only on behalf of the laborers just because they were poor people and stuff. He did not have the soft bigotry of low expectations. That's what I can appreciate here. He was saying that when the capitalists require it, everyone become his bitch. When the laborers require it, everyone become their bitch. In short, the claims of the capital and labor will be so coordinated from time to time as to enable the nation as a whole to develop its national industry and manufacture and make itself self-sufficient. It never happens that way. In some cases of the key industries or manufacturers and such other items may be altogether nationalized if the national government can afford to do so. All of this was actually what Savarkar recommends was done by the Nehru government, and it was see how it turned out. Although Nehru government did deindustrialization on top of what Savarkar was manufacturing, so it was worst of all worlds. Nehru is saying it was better than Nehru. Yeah, in theory it was better than Nehru. It was going to be as disastrous as Nehru's policy anyway. In some cases of the key industries or manufacturers and such other items may be altogether nationalized if the national government can afford to do so and can conduct them more efficiently than private enterprise can do, which never has happened in the history of mankind. The same principle applies to cultivation of land. We should so coordinate the interest of the landlord and the peasant that the national agricultural production may, on the whole, be developed and does not suffer owing to any selfish tussle between the class interests of the landowner or the tenants or the tiller. In some cases, the government may take over the land and introduce state cultivation if it can serve to train up the peasant class as a whole with the use of big machines and agriculture on a large scale and scientific scale. तो on a large and scientific scale, तो ये भी अब नहीं हो रहा है farm laws के वजह से. All strikes or lockouts which are obviously meant or inevitably tend to undermine and cripple national industry or production in general or are calculated to weaken the economic strength of the nation as a whole must be referred to state arbitration and get settled or in serious cases quelled. Private property must in general be held inviolate. and in no case there should be on the part of the state any expropriation of such property without reasonable recompense. Every step must be taken by the state to protect national industries against foreign competition. Again, this would always get screwed up. I have hurriedly lined out the above, but all in all, in theory, it's better than Nehruvian economics. So it's not exactly socialism. It was some in between thing. I have hurriedly lined out the above items to serve as illustrations only. The national economical strength must grow, and the nation must be made economically self-sufficient. Those two form the pivot of the policy. And here, his core goals are achievable today only by the free market and libertarianism. So we can say that our goals were same, but our ways were different. In terms of Congress and commies, I think even the goals are different. A special feature of no less importance of this Hindu Sangathanist economics must of course be to safeguard the economical interests of the Hindus wherever and whenever they may be threatened by the economical aggression of the non-Hindus, as happens today as a set policy in the Nizam state, in the Punjab, in Bhopal, in Assam, and in several other parts of India. Hindu Sabhas in all localities should make it a point to see that the Hindu peasants, the Hindu traders, the Hindu laborers do not suffer at the hands of non-Hindu aggression, while the conflicting class interests among the Hindus themselves should be solved in the light of the above general principle. Our immediate program for the next 2 years. The European War. The two explicit resolutions passed by the Working Committee regarding our policy towards the war in Europe leave nothing more to be said on that subject. As no new event has happened to demand a change, I exhort the British government once more that a definite and immediate declaration of granting the Dominion status as contemplated in the Westminster Statute to India as the end of the war at the latest is the only means to secure wholehearted sympathy of the Hindu people with England in this present struggle, and to ensure the willingness even of an independent India in the future to continue a co-partnership in the Commonwealth on equal terms. Any delaying in granting the Dominion status as an immediate step to enable India to tread on the path of evolutionary progress towards her ultimate political destiny would prove dangerous even to the solidarity of the British Commonwealth. The rise and rapid advance of Japan in the east, of Russia, Italy, and Germany in the west are events portentous, and a contented and self-governing India cannot but be a mighty benefactor in strengthening the British position in facing any anti-British combination. But no amount of political sophistry can disarm Indian discontent and make her tolerate the humiliation of continuing as a British dependency. We are ready to help the British, मगर तुम्हारे नौकर के जैसे नहीं. Do you expect any longer to dupe her into the belief that it is only the want of an understanding between the Indian majority and minority, that Hindus and Muslims with regard to such details as the percentage in representation, etc., that justifies England in delaying the grant of Dominion status forthwith? कि हमारे बीच में बवाल हो रहा है इसलिए तुम रह जाओ भाई. The British statesmen have recently stated that their conscience forbids to thrust an understanding on the minority, the Muslims in India, against their will, and would not move an inch till the Hindus and Muslims have produced a willing compromise and a common demand for a progressive constitution. ये इतना positive rights सरकार ये कर देगा वो कर देगा, ये ना बहुत European thinking है. And I think because of the heavily European thinking which Savarkar extrapolated on the economics as well. The British statesmen have recently stated that their conscience forbids to thrust an understanding on the minority, the Muslims in India, against their will, and would not move an inch till the Hindus and Muslims have produced a willing compromise and a common demand for a progressive constitution. प्रोग्रेसिव बन बस, ठीक है, नहीं तो मैं प्रोग्रेसिव नहीं बनूंगा, ठीक है, प्रोग्रेसिव बनो नहीं तो नॉन प्रोग्रेसिव आ जाएगा, ये है थ्रेट. प्रोग्रेसिव कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन करो नहीं तो मैं इंपीरियलिज्म एंड फैशिज्म चलाऊंगा तुम्हारे ऊपर. ये है आर्गुमेंट. But may it be asked that when you thrust your unmitigated political autocracy on India, was there any plebiscite taken to ascertain Indian opinion? Or did you take a plebiscite or receive a united request from the minority and the majority when only a couple of months ago you scrapped up the provincial autonomy at a stroke and invested governors with powers to conduct the government at their own discretion and in their own judgment? आने के वक्त, चलाने के वक्त अगर ओपिनियन नहीं लिया था तो अब जाने के लिए ओपिनियन क्यों चाहिए तुम्हें? वो भी यूनाइटेड ओपिनियन, यूनानिमस ओपिनियन. And if you could thrust undiluted autocracy, vassalage on India, and hold her at a dependency, can you not thrust a dominion status on her in spite of the will of a minority, and especially so when the majority has unanimously demanded it? You can thrust curses. Can you not thrust blessings? The sooner the British people cease to have a resort to these transparent political subterfuges and to utilize the Muslim minority to camouflage their own unwillingness to grant Hindustan her birthright, her Swarajya, while she is still treading on an evolutionary path of political progress, the better for England, the better for India. If the evolutionary path is thus altogether closed to the Hindus, in particular by empowering the Muslims with a definite veto on all equitable progress, a deadlock may ensue, but only for a while, because nature hates a vacuum. And if evolutionary progress is denied, the gathering forces of time spirit cannot but take the other and more dangerous turn. Next 2 years, constructive program for the Hindu Sabhaists. Unless indeed something unexpected and a far more imminent and urgent duty faces us, in the meanwhile I call upon all Hindu Sabhas, whether local, provincial or central, to concentrate their efforts on the following threefold constructive program in the main. We have numberless tasks before us, all useful, all pressing in their own way, but it is always better to begin with the beginning, instead of getting lost in details or trying to do all at once and ending in leaving everything undone or ill done or bungled, carried away by anything and everything that comes in the way. It is always wiser to choose relatively what is most fundamental, control the controllable, most effective, and at the same time within the reach of our present resources and ability, and hit upon a plan to intensify our efforts on those items only in the main. We should always remember that unless we gather strength, we cannot and should not always be after precipitating struggles only for the sake of demonstration and excitement at the risk of quoting an inevitable failure when it is uncalled for. Navigators abide by the tide. Even lions lie in wait. Great dreadnoughts are built in silent and hidden quarters of the ports before they are called out in action and can with their multi-throated roar and fire out their opponents. I have not selected the following items at random. All the above factors are taken into consideration in their selection. These three items are the most fundamental, the most urgent, and yet quite within the reach of almost every Hindu Sangatanist who means to do the really needful at the hour, which, though it may not be quite exciting to begin with, is yet quite sure to enable the forces of Hindudom to face a righteous fight in defense of its honor and freedom when the hour is struck. Those who can undertake other items of the Sangathan work also, those who can undertake other items of the Sangathan work along with these may of course do so, but our first and foremost attention must be concentrated on these three items for the next 2 years to begin with. Whatever we will be able to accomplish in this direction within these 2 years will put us in a position of vantage to solve other questions far more effectively than it can be done if we take them up now. Therefore, intensify your efforts on conducting a whirlwind campaign at every village and town and city. 2. What are the three things? The three things are: remove untouchability. 2. Compel all universities, colleges and schools to make military training compulsory to students and secure entry into the naval, aerial and military forces and institutions for your youth in any and every way. Meanwhile, Agniveer ke virudh riot ho gaya Bhosri ke. 3. Prepare the Hindu electorate to the utmost measure possible to vote only for those Hindu Sangatanists who openly pledge to safeguard Hindu interests, and not to vote for the Congress candidates who can never serve Hindu interests with full freedom and boldness, even if they wish or promise to do so long as they are bound by the Congress discipline and tied to the Congress ticket. The first of these items will enable you to consolidate, meaning removing untouchability, will enable you to consolidate at least a couple of crores of your own brethren who are religiously, culturally, nationally, and in every other way as much a part and parcel of Hindudom as any of us can claim to be. Every local Hindu Sabha must see to it in its own locality that these our so-called untouchable brethren are immediately elevated to the level of the so-called touchable by securing to them all fundamental rights which every citizen, even non-Hindus, are entitled to exercise in public life. Why? Why was he a why did he respect Hindu traditions to a large extent, at least, except these traditions, but the religious texts and stuff? Why did he then go against untouchability? Because he realized they were just ancient status groups which were going on today as cosplaying fancy dress competitions, and there's no need to continue them today. They are not status groups of today, even though they are not status groups even more today, but they exist only because of state incentivization. We should persuade our untouchable brothers, in cases wherever untouchable brothers are oppressed in any way on the only ground of untouchability based on birth alone, to fight their cause out, if need be, by restoring to law courts, by resorting to law courts, resorting to law courts. Of course, we should on no account molest or disrespect the sentiments of our Sanatani brothers so far as their personal freedom is concerned. But in public schools, conveyances, posts, services, and in every aspect of public life, no Hindu should be permitted to deprive other Hindus of their public rights on ground of caste untouchability alone. Whatever social equality we Hindus allow to Muslims and other non-Muslim and other non-Hindus must as of right belong to our Hindu brothers of whatever caste they be. To act otherwise is in reality an insult to our common Hinduness. It must be plainly mentioned here that even those who are at present bracketed as untouchables are themselves guilty of this sin, just like those who are bracketed as touchable Hindus. For every untouchable caste treats some other caste supposed to be inferior to it as untouchable as ruthlessly as it is treated itself by others. The sin is common to all of us, and therefore let us all join hands together and be determined to remove this sore with a supreme effort. In the meanwhile, our Sanatani brothers may rest assured that, barring the fundamental rights which every citizen is entitled to in public life, the Hindu Mahasabha will always refrain from taking any recourse to law to entrust any religious reform on any sect within the Hindu fold, even in the case of untouchability. So here, Savarkar stops short of doing positive rights, which I like. कि एंटी कास्टिज्म दिखाने के लिए अलग कास्ट में मैरी करना ही होगा, ऐसा भी नहीं बोल रहा है सावरकर. But those Hindu Sangatanists who are convinced of the incalculable harm untouchability has done, okay, who are convinced of the incalculable harm untouchability has done and is doing and is doing, should also be free to act up according to their own conscience in their own dealings. The lines on which I call upon the Hindu Sangatanists to carry on an intense campaign of removing untouchability would be made clear from time to time as the work proceeds. I may mention here, even at the risk of a personal reference, that those who can should make it a point to read the report of the 10 years work done by the Ratnagiri Hindu Sabha under my lead in conducting such an intense campaign against untouchability, which was attended with notable success. Yes, Beti Bandi should be broken down, but only as a should. That yes, I think it's a good thing to do, not in terms of forced legalities. Hindu Sabha under my lead. In conducting such an intense campaign against success. It will also make it clear that the approach of the Hindu Sabha to the question of the removal of untouchability differs at the root from the approach of the Gandhian attempt to remove it. Therefore, although we may cooperate, yet we should not identify our movement with the Gandhian movement. In the next 2 years' time, we Hindu Sabhaists must do more in removing untouchability than 200 years could do in the past. और ये कैंपेन से नहीं होता है, free market से ही होगा. So far as the second item is concerned, which is that compel all universities to teach defense and military stuff, etc. So far as the second item is concerned, the plans will be outlined in the All India Committee and the sittings of the working committee from time to time. The third item, which is the prepare the Hindu electorate to vote only for Hindu Sabha or Hindu Sangatanists. The third item constitutes, of course, the very keystone of the whole program. Unless and until the Hindu electorate does not return only the Hindu Sangatanists to the legislatures and local bodies, but allows the Congress the right to represent the Hindu electorate in the eyes of the government, the Hindus must continue to remain as political orphans in Hindustan in their own country. The Hindus may fight and win political rights as they have done to a great extent in the past, but so long as they have not cured themselves of this suicidal folly of resigning those rights in the hands of the Congress at the polls, they can never expect to strengthen the legitimate position of Hindudom in India. But on the contrary, will find themselves as non-entities, and the Muslims alone more profited by those very rights which the Hindus have won, and consequently in a position to suppress the Hindus with all the greater impact. Remember also that a new roundtable conference or a sort of a constituent assembly may be called in the near future. So long as the Hindus return as their representatives, the Congressites alone, the government is bound and justified to look upon the Congress to represent the Hindu view, even if the Congress protests against it. And they will not recognize the Congress as representing the Muslims or the nation as a whole, even if the Congress claims that position, because the Muslims refuse to return any Muslim on the Congress ticket as a rule. Even Dr. Kichlu was defeated at the Muslim polls because he stood on the Congress ticket. Under such circumstances, there is a grave and sure danger of further surrender of Hindu rights to Muslim demands, which are already claiming equality of status even in the Hindu provinces. There will be no use of any protest from the Hindu Sangatanists or of the secret bickerings or fulminations of those Hindus in the Congress camp itself who personally hate this attitude on the part of the Congress as an organization. For there will be no party with credentials from the Hindu electorate to represent them who can advocate at the conference the legitimate Hindu rights as freely and boldly and uncompromisingly as the Muslim League representatives can do there. Yes, that is the case. And Ashraf Muslims, not Pasmandas, of course. There are many Bengalis who do this. Some do it just because of modern context caste status groups, and some do it just for stupidity and cosplaying and fancy dress competitions, fancy dress parties. But if the Hindu electorate does ever come to its senses, refuses to return which is I guess today, not largely though, to return the Congressite candidates and returns only the Hindu Sangatanists in majority, the Hindus can have a Hindu Sangatanists government in at least 7 provinces as the Muslims have in the Punjab, Bengal, etc. And the Hindus can capture enough political power so as to be in a position to remove at least 75% of the grievances under which they are groaning now, even in the provinces like UP, where they form the majority and the Congress ruled. The provincial police and the public service will be under the command of Hindu Sangatanist governments and will not dare to trample on or neglect Hindu rights. Nay, the Muslims themselves will neither dare to encroach upon Hindu rights nor put forward such intolerable anti-Hindu or anti-national demands. As we have no grudge against the Muslim minority insofar as their legitimate rights are concerned, as we have no grudge against the Muslim minority insofar as their legitimate rights are concerned, and as the Hindu Sangatanists are ever willing to live in an honorable friendship and amity with their Muslim countrymen in Hindustan, the Muslim minority too will have every protection in the exercise of its legitimate rights. Therefore, all our efforts must be intensely concentrated during the next 2 or 3 years in persuading the Hindu electorate to vote for the Hindu Sangatanists alone, and not to vote for the Congressites in any future election. This will require a daily press devoted to the Hindu Sangatanist cause. Daily press, Brahmin Bhojan. Sangatanist cause and a central fund. Above all, we shall have to form a Hindu party, including Sanatanists, Arya Samajists, and all such other Hindu bodies, sects and sections who have not as yet any formal connection with the Hindu Mahasabha as an organization, but are as devoted Hindu Sangatanists as the Hindu Sabhaists themselves. The ways and means of effecting it or affecting it all is a matter of detail and ought to be attended to by the local, provincial, and the central Hindu Mahasabha organizations, and above all by all Hindu Sangatanists, whether they be formal members of the Hindu Sabha or not. But if, in spite of our efforts, the Hindu electorate persists in its suicidal folly and votes for the Congress, and we do not secure a majority at the polls, never mind. Our efforts are sure to succeed in securing a minority, as we already find in Maharashtra and some other places that Hindu Sangatanist candidates are not only elected in some hotly contested elections against the Congress, but in cases have topped the polls. And even the presence of a minority of devoted Hindu Sangatanists in legislatures and local bodies acts as an effective check on the waywardness of the majority, gives a tongue unto Hindu grievances, and paves way to further progress in power. But if we are completely outvoted at the elections and do not secure a single seat, never mind still. We shall acknowledge the defeat and share the humiliation in general. But we can proudly claim for ourselves, individually, that we did not betray our conscience in spite of overwhelming odds. The responsibility of the electoral defeat and the humiliation will lie on the Hindu electorate in general, and not on him who casts his own vote, at any rate on the Hindu side. Moreover, the very risk of a contest in elections against the Congress on such a righteous issue is bound to compel the Congress to be more and more afraid of sacrificing Hindu interests on the altar of the fetish of a pseudo-nationalism. To join the national fight, when and while the forces are winning, is patriotic enough. But when the fight for a righteous cause is almost lost, to persist still in rallying round its banner and refuse to betray one's conscience to the last, in spite of a general defeat and humiliation, is simply heroic. And all that an honest soldier can individually do. If he cannot share the joy of a general victory, nothing can deprive him of the supreme satisfaction of having done his duty well. This should be the faith with which the Hindu Sangatanists should continue their contest under the present circumstances. Let us determine, even if the worst comes to the worst, to be the last of the devoted batch of the Hindu Sangatanist than to be the first of the Hindu traitors. That's the end of the speech. We'll do the next speeches the next day, some other day. It will be nice to keep his ideas and thoughts alive by reading these speeches every now and then. We just completed page 299. I was reading from page 188 today. Nice. Curtain falls. हाँ, I started from page 190. ये पूरा इंटरसेक्शन आज मैंने आज पढ़ा है, सिर्फ आज में ही. ओके, नाइस. यहाँ तक पढ़ा था पिछले दिन तक. आज ये पब्लिक लाइव स्ट्रीम और मेंबर्स लाइव स्ट्रीम मिलाकर इतना. एंड द बुक इज प्रीटी टॉल, इसलिए आई डोंट हैव एनर्जी एनीमोर. आई थॉट आई वुड ट्राई टू फिनिश द बुक, बट द पेजेस आर सो लॉन्ग, द फॉन्ट साइज इज रीजनेबली स्मॉल एंड सो मच पेजेस. तो अब मेरा दिमाग हिल चुका है. सो आई हैव टू क्विट द बुक नाउ. Book name, Hindu Rashtra Darshan. It's a collection of 3 sections, 3 kinds of things in the book. Okay, retrieve. So section 1 is his entire history that he had written on the Maratha Confederacy. Okay, different Maharashtrian kings and stuff. Part 2 is where we are now, a collection of his speeches, and part 3 is that famous 80-page work called Essentials of Hindutva, sort of a manifesto. What a great book! It was worth buying. What a great man. Dada, your thoughts on India not developing large language models and Nandan Nilekani saying leave to the big. Why? I don't know. What are his explanations? Funding? ये उतना funding नहीं कर पाएगा यहाँ पे कोई, इसलिए. What do you mean leave? Why should we leave it to the big boys in the valley? Anyway, since I'm pretty tired, I'll go offline now. Give us a brief, please. Brief on what? Brief on the speech. He says we don't need it. Yeah, why? Why wouldn't we need it? Need it नहीं है कि ये cope है for not having enough funding. I'll have to do a podcast with my friend Shayok Paul then one day. Okay, then. Thank you for joining the live stream, guys. It was very fascinating, very touching. And do check out, if you can, the membership live stream and especially the previous speech. All pre workout and workout motivation stuff. Which is better for Bengal, TMC or BJP? How's Bengal working out? Is Bengal in a good spot? What's the point of this question? Thank you for joining, guys. Good night. Bye bye.
श्रवरूढं महाभीमं गुणाद्रष्टाङ्गरप्रदम् अस्य युक्तं त्रिनेत्रं च कपालकर्णिकाकरान् मुक्तकेशीं ललज्जयः पिबन्तीं रुधिरं चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् काली काली